we'll be speaking about this afternoon, which is the topic of discipline. Now, I've entitled this presentation, Those Whom I Love, I Discipline. It's a well-familiar verse in Revelation 3:19, and we're going to cover that in just a little bit. My first question to you is, what comes to mind when you hear the word discipline? Spanking. Number one, okay. Correction. Boundaries. Okay. Guidance. Training. All right, so we've got a variety of answers here that covered a big ground of what discipline actually is. If you go to the dictionary, the definition for discipline is the practice of training people to obey rules or a code of behavior using punishment to correct disobedience, right? So many focus only on the aspect of punishment. Like the first answer we heard was spanking. So for a lot of people, that's the first thing that comes to mind is the aspect of punishment and correction. But we do forget a lot of times the biggest meaning of the word discipline, which is to train, to teach, to instruct, or to disciple and to mold someone, right? So the practice of training people. So we are first supposed to train and spend time with them and connect with them and disciple them. And of course, if they don't learn, then there comes the correction for the specific behavior. Now, Revelation 3:19 says, those whom I reprove and discipline. And this is directly coming from the throne of God. We are all his children, and we've all gone and are still going through the school of discipline, okay? So discipline oftentimes has a negative connotation, but I want to bring out here that it's an act of love, right? Instructing, connecting, and even punishment can be done in a way that it comes as an act of love. It can not show love too, depending on how you do it, but it was intended by God to be an act of love, so much so that he even says, those whom I love, I reprove and discipline. Now, the world today emphasizes the need and the importance for love and connection. Now, maybe some of us here, especially the older generation, it's not necessarily the emphasis that you had when growing up, right? Basically, growing up, your father is the law and you just respect him because you respect him. It doesn't matter if you love him or not, you respect him, right? That's basically how a lot of us were raised. But today there is this wave of this great emphasis on love and connecting with our children. And somehow this affection and this connection has been written in many books. There are many books out there now on parenting. And if you're not careful on choosing these books, you can easily get swayed into the other extreme of permissive parenting, right? Though love and connecting with children is an excellent idea, if this is your end, if this is your goal only and not really to teach and to discipline, then you're falling into the trap of permissive parenting, because usually permissive parenting have no rules, there's no limit, there's no discipline. And it's true that in order for us to gain the love and respect from our children, we must love, respect, and connect with our children. But if this is your end goal, there is a problem there, right? Now, Desire of Ages says, only by love is love awakened. Do you want your children to love you? What do you do to them? You love them. You want your children to respect you? What do you do to them? You also respect them, right? There is a certain level of respect that we as parents have to give to our children in order for us to freely receive back the respect that we deserve as parents. Now, we cannot ignore the importance of submission and correction. Child Guidance 177 says, The parents have taught they love their children, but they have proved themselves their worst enemies. They have let evil go unrestrained. They've allowed their children to cherish sin, which is like cherishing and petting a viper that will not only sting the victim who cherishes it, but all with whom he is connected. So you're not only causing damage to your child, but you're allowing her character to develop into a viper that's going to sting everyone that she's in connection with. And then it continues to say, what kind of love is this that permits your child to develop traits of character that will make him and everyone else miserable? Away with such love. True love will look out for the present and eternal good of the soul. So a lot of parents with the desire of just outpouring love for their children, they will let evil go unrestrained because they think this is an act of love. But God says, what kind of love is this? This is not coming from me, because true love disciplines. And there's a striking difference between books such as Jesus, the Gentle Parent, or the five love languages of children, and the books Child Guidance and Adventist Home. When you read one and you read the other, there are some principles that may be intertwined, such as loving and connecting with children. But when it comes to disciplining them, it is completely different. And we need to be careful with the type of literature we choose in order to raise our children, because God has given us the best type. And when we go to the world seeking for more information, sometimes we can get easily confused with some of the ideas that the world is putting out there. And Satan is very smart, and he will try to make a book look really innocent. But the more you start reading that literature, the more permissive you start becoming. Because after all, kids have rights. After all, you must love the child. After all, they don't need to be punished. And after all, suddenly you fall into the trap of permissive parenting. And so when you read any book that's not inspired, you must have your inspired books right there to compare. And if by any chance they contradict one another, which one should we dispose of? The uninspired book, right? So we know that obedience is the first lesson of character development, and children who are allowed to have their own way are unhappy, right? Contrary to what they believe, they think that if they got their way, life would be much better. God is very clear. If you allow children to have their own way, they are unhappy. Now, I do want to make a point here that this doesn't mean a child can never make a good decision, right? If your child today chose to wear the pink dress over the blue dress, that's not going to make her unhappy. But once that starts to cross the line of obedience and disobedience, that's when it's talking about. Children have the rights of making certain decisions, and they should be given those privileges as far as possible, right? Which fruits would you like to eat today? We have a variety of 3 or 4 at the table, and you can give them the choice of making the choice of breakfast they want to have. Okay, well, you have 2 options for your Sabbath dress this morning. Which one would you like to wear? So as far as possible, we ought to give children the opportunity to make some choices. But once that's not given to them, they have to accept your word, because otherwise they will be unhappy. Now, the main reason why we ought to teach children obedience is because once they start to become obedient to you, they learn how to obey and respect their parents. In respecting and rendering obedience to their parents, respecting Jesus, they may learn how to respect and obey their Heavenly Father. I think this is the main goal as to why we need to keep in mind why obedience is so important. A child who does not learn to obey their parents at home will have a much harder time obeying God's laws, right? They don't know how to submit to authority. And so obedience and trust, they go hand in hand. A child that obeys a parent, they trust that parent. And a child that does not learn obedience, they don't really trust, and this is why it's so hard for them to submit. They will carry that habit into their spiritual life, and it will become harder for them to obey and to trust God. Now, When should we begin? When should we begin teaching children discipline? The minute they're born is the answer I get. Well, I'll go even beyond the minute they're born, okay? Uh, in the womb, that's right. We hear a lot of prenatal influences, a lot about prenatal influences. If before the birth of her child, she is self-indulgent, if she is selfish, impatient, and exacting, these traits will be reflected in the disposition of the child. Thus, many children have received as a birthright almost unconquerable tendencies to evil. They look so cute and innocent. You could almost eat them, but they came with unconquerable tendencies to evil. And it's really sad. You know, people say, oh, babies, they're just so perfect. Well, I like to look at babies as a spoiled material, and it's the parents' responsibility to try to fix it with God's help. They are not born perfect. They are born sinful, and unfortunately, with a lot of the tendencies from the parents and the mother especially. So before this child is born, that's when you begin disciplining the child by being a disciplined mother and father. This is where it starts. Once they are born, it's not too late. But it's going to be harder if you were already not disciplined while this child was in the womb. The basis of a right character in the future man is made firm by habits of strict temperance in the mother prior to the birth of the child. This lesson should not be regarded with indifference. And it's interesting to notice that Satan, again, is very smart, and he uses those 9 months of pregnancy as the months of granting all the wishes and desires of the pregnant woman, you know, and that's when they will indulge in appetite and wishes and desires that they don't even have those temptations aside from pregnancy. And I know that must not come from God. If it's the time where strict temperance should be observed and suddenly you start having all these cravings you've never had before, and all we have to say is, I have all these pregnancy cravings, and you just yield into those pregnancy cravings. Well, I got bad news from you. I don't really think those come from God. And so we need to be firm on our principle to be able to stand those temptations, and they will come very strong. I know people who are very careful even with their diets, and they will have these cravings. And we know that physiologically those cravings could be a lack of a certain nutrient that you have, but we have better choices to make out there. So prenatal influences play a very important role in disciplining children. Now, of course, again, when the child is born, that's when you have a more direct influence on the child's life. And it says, parents, you should commence your first lessons of discipline when your children are babes in your arms. Teach them to yield their will to yours. Now, does that mean we're spanking our 9-month-old baby? Because after all, one of the definitions here of discipline was spanking. Is this what we're talking about? No, we are talking about instructing this child and teaching this baby, actually, because babies in the arms, for me, it's below 1 year old, right? So when they're still infants is when you start to teach them that their will has to be submitted to yours. A baby that's constantly throwing herself backwards when she doesn't get her will. What do? Do we give the baby their will? No. That's the time that you don't give their will. You bring that child back to you, and you say, we do not throw ourselves backwards, and you walk away from the situation, and you do not yield into the child's desire right at the moment, because once it's done, that's all it takes. It takes one time for a child to learn, if I throw myself, if I scream, if I throw a fit, they're going to grant my desire, because no parent wants to see a child meltdown, right? But it's better to see a child melt down once because he didn't get it and learn that he's not going to get it than to constantly have to deal with those temper tantrums is what we called, right? So when they are little, when they are babies, we can tell them, touch the hand a little severely if necessary. Children are curious by nature. They are going to try to test you, and they're going to try to touch things that they are not supposed to. And you know, a lot of parents, I know, they baby-proof their home. And to a certain extent, of course, it's good because it's for the safety of your child. But when you do that, you basically have removed every temptation that they could be faced with. And it's okay, but the moment you leave your house, that child has no boundaries because they can touch everything, right? So we're not supposed to put temptations in front of them by making the house in a way that they are not allowed to touch anything, but certain things should remain. And they need to learn, this I must touch, this I must not. This I'm allowed to touch, and this I'm not allowed to touch, so that when you leave the home, that child knows. Just like at home, there are things that I'm not allowed to touch. And here she says, when he reaches after the forbidden object, again, say, no, 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 mustn't touch, mustn't touch. And if thus trained in their babyhood and early childhood, they will learn to obey while still very young. Mothers, be sure that you properly discipline your children during the first 3 years of their lives. Now, my child is 5, and I've made many mistakes. What now? Is it over for me? Is it game over? No, it isn't. There is still time to fix. And as she says, if you've waited until your children were 3 years old to begin to teach them self-control and obedience, seek to do it now, even though it will be much harder. So a child that has learned from birth that the parents' word is law, and that they have to yield to their authority, has a much easier transition through the terrible 2s and 3s and 4s and whatever you want to call them than a child that does not have any boundaries. And later on, when it's a bigger child, the parents try to restrain them. It is still possible. Nothing is impossible. God can even change an adult's heart, right? But it's much harder. And this is why we don't recommend waiting, because what I like to say is that raising kids is like playing video games, right? Every phase gets what? It does not get easier. When they are born, they are hard. You don't figure them out. They cry day and night, and it's just hard. And then they start to crawl, and what happens? It gets harder, and you're like, how can this get harder? It seemed so hard in the beginning. Now they're getting into everything. And then they start walking, and it's like, ooh, this is to another level. Now you're running to the streets, and you cannot blink, and you've lost your child. And then wait until they start talking. And you're going to be like, that 1-month-old baby was way easier. And then they become teenagers. I'm not there yet, but I was a teenager once, and I know the headache I brought to my parents. And so it doesn't get easier. It does not get easier. And this is why when they are babies, it seems hard, but it's only going to get harder. With God's help, we are able to survive those challenges, but it does not get easier to the point where you can think, oh, eventually this will just self-correct. It does not self-correct, okay? So now, I believe the essence of discipline has been well established here. We know when to begin, and we know now that it doesn't get any easier. But one of the points that you need to establish in your home, if it hasn't already been established, is rules, right? And I know not everybody likes rules, but it's the first step. What's the first step in establishing rules? So let's go here to Adventist home, page 16. It says, every Christian home should have rules, right? God created the world, and he was wise enough to give us rules. The rules are for our safety, right? They're not to make us unhappy. They're not to put a leash around our neck. They're for our safety and for our happiness. If children have no boundaries, they live very insecure lives, right? Children that don't have boundaries, they are not necessarily happy and secure. They are unhappy and they are insecure. And culture nowadays tells us we can't say no to children, but that's not really what the Bible tells us. And so we got to be very careful with the message that's coming out there from the world. A world with no rules, authority, or submission is a very dangerous world for children. Child Guidance 323 says these rules should be few and well considered. And once made, they should be enforced. So it's not because rules are good to have that we're going to create 107 of them, right? Rules should be few and they should be well considered, but once they are made, they should be enforced. It will do you no good to write your rules and then forget all about it, right? It's better not to have them to start with if you're not going to follow. So if you establish some rules, you have to be strong enough to keep your mind to make sure that these rules are being followed. So the principle is, once the rule is established, you remind the child often of the rule. Children forget, adults do too. So the rules are reminded and they are enforced. I'm going to share with you the rules that we've created in our home. I'm not saying this is a template of what needs to be followed, but just so you have an idea, what kind of rules are we creating here, right? So in our home, we created, I believe it's 6 rules that I have here. Number 1 is respect to God, right? Number 1 rule is we have to respect God. So we have to be reverent during prayer, during family worship, and during church services. This is a rule that we created in our house. Now, you will see that most rules are based on respect. The second one is respect to authority. And I put here authority and not just parent, because this authority could be a teacher, it could be a grandparent, it could be an uncle, an auntie, a neighbor, whoever it is. It's first command obedience and unquestionable obedience, right? Now, what is unquestionable obedience? We're going to get into that later. But first command obedience is once you receive a command, you're going to obey cheerfully, thoroughly, and immediately, right? Those are the 3 steps. Number 3 is respect towards others. So greeting people, sharing, or no verbal or physical aggression, even respect to animals, we kind of put inside of the number 3, especially my older child. I don't know, when she was little, and she's not here, by the way, I made sure my husband took them out. She had this tendency of wanting to scare animals, and I don't know where she got that from, and it became a problem. And we would tell her over and over and over, if you see a duck by the road, you don't just purposefully stomp your foot to chase the duck away. So you got to respect others, respect God's creation, even respect for animals is a good rule to put in there, because once they start respecting things like that, they learn, well, if I'm respecting the animals, I'm going to respect my friends, and I'm going to respect my sister and my parents, and then it brings out the respect for God. Now, on respect towards others here on the greeting, I do want to just explain a little bit about it. I don't know about you, but it really bothers me, and maybe it shouldn't bother me, but it does bother me, that when I greet an adult and I don't get a response, it kind of is disturbing. Have you ever had that experience? You're like, oh, hello, and the person just and walks away. I'm like, what's wrong with that person, And I just had committed in my heart that I was going to raise my children not to be that way. And children have a tendency of not wanting to greet others. And I think we have to be respectful to the way that they want to be greeted. I come from a very warm culture where hugging strangers is common, and my children did not like that. I remembered when we would go to Brazil, I would go to my home church. For those that don't know, I was born and raised in Brazil. And coming back to my home church, 5-10 years later, people are they remember me when I was 2, And so when they see my children, they naturally feel that they have a connection to them. And they come and try to give them a big hug. Well, the child has never seen that person before. So for them, you're just nothing but a complete stranger. And suddenly you want to hold me. And I started to feel that I needed to create some guidelines here so that my children felt also comfortable. There's a line that we can cross, and we can expose our children to experiences where they start feeling uncomfortable having to be greeting all these strangers. So we created the rule of the 4 ages. And if you want to write that down, that may be helpful to you. So the first one was a hug. You have 4 options on how you feel comfortable greeting people. There are certain people, they come with open arms, and they are very happy to give them a hug. If they are not happy to give them a hug, they can give them a handshake. That's the second one. Handshake is a little less invasive. We're right there, but we're not quite there. And with some people, the handshake was still too much for them. And I said, well, you got option number 3. It's a high five. High fives are very popular nowadays. Just give them a high five. Well, to some people, a high five was too much for them. And I said, you've got your last and 4th option, which is hello. And that one, there's no way out of it. You're going to look at the person in the eye and you're going to say hello. Because if you're not willing to give them a hug, a handshake, a high five, the hello is going to have to come out, because we are simply to respect people. And this has really helped me, because before setting those guidelines, I kind of left it up to the other person to determine what kind of greeting they wanted. And it's not fair to the child. You know, some children, they just don't feel comfortable with that. And we have to respect. Now, of course, if it's mommy, daddy, or grandmother, I will encourage them to give grandma a hug, right? But not to the person that they see once a year that they don't even remember from the year before. So on the rule of greeting others, it boiled down to at least a hug, right? You don't have to touch them. I mean, at least a hello. You don't have to touch them. You just go like this, hello, and I'll accept that as polite enough, right? Rule number 4, self-respect. So we start with respect to God, respect to authority, respect to others, and self-respect. On self-respect, we have general health principles such as their diet, their water intake, their amount of exercise, sleep time, and their time for reflection, right? It's a rule in the home that we set aside time for personal reflection. My children, since they were 2 years old, that they could sit still, open a book, seal their lips, and if they don't read, they can just flip through pictures and just think of the story that's in that book. Everybody gets the time for reflection. And then number 5, work comes before play. Now, that only works once the children begin to actually understand the difference between work and play. When they're babies, work is play, play is work. So once they understand, okay, this is playtime, this is work time, we must get our chores done before it is playtime. Okay, my dad usually say the only place, he used to tell me when I was a child, the only place in the world that play comes before work is in the dictionary. So in real life, work comes before play. And number 6, just general politeness, right? The words please, sorry, excuse me, thank you are necessary in the home, and they will be used then outside the home. Now, we've always tried to teach the girls that I want doesn't really get you anywhere, right? Unless they're saying, I want to be more like Jesus. Anything aside from I want to be more like Jesus is, may I have water rather than I want water? May I have more food rather than I want more food? May I have this toy rather than give me the toy? So things like that start right at a young age. You're not going to get things that you're not asking for under may I or could I please. All right. Now, so step number 1 is the establishment of rules. And step number 2 is correct 100% of the time. Because once you've established rules, if you're only to correct 90 or 80% of the time, the child will quickly pick up that they have 20% chance of getting away with it, right? And they're way smarter than we think they are. Adventist Home says, the mother allows misdemeanors to pass at one time for which she will severely punish at another. The children never know just what to expect and are tempted to see how far they can transgress with impunity. If you allow them to get away with things, they will start testing their boundaries. They want to know how far they can get, just how far I can get away with things. The mother should not allow her child to gain advantage over her in a single instance. And in order to maintain this authority, it's not necessary to resort to harsh measures. A firm, steady hand and a kindness which convinces the child of your love will accomplish the purpose. So the child should not gain advantage over the mother even one time. Okay? Now, they will try many times. So the problem is not them trying, because that's inevitable. They will try. The issue is, am I going to allow it to happen or not, right? So controlling whether the child is going to try or not, I haven't mastered that, but at least we're at the point that we can easily detect and we can easily correct it, okay? So in a book that I shared with you this morning, Studies in Character Building by Dr. Kellogg's wife, she has a statement and it says, a little girl who persisted in a certain misdemeanor for which she was repeatedly punished was asked by her mother, Laura, why do you continue to do this wrong when you know that I always punish you for doing? And her response was, oh, Mama, said the little girl, because one time you forgot. So that one time that the mother forgot was enough for her to continually test the boundaries to see how far she could get away with it. So you got to be on top of things. And I'm not saying you got to put on your, detective eyes, but as soon as you see, whoops, that child is trying to gain advantage over me, that has to be corrected. Now, how do we correct? That's the question. A little bit was touched on it this morning, correcting in love. To manifest passion toward an erring child is to increase the evil. I usually like to say when a child has a passion outbreak, our job as parents is to throw water and not fuel into the fire, because depending on how you respond to it, you can put the fire down or you can make the fire even bigger, right? A parent who, when correcting a child, gives way to anger is more at fault than the child. Now, if you thought your child's mistake was real big to the point that it drove you to insanity and anger, and you respond to the child in anger, well, I got bad news. You're now at worse fault than your child was to begin with. And so we got to be very careful when correcting children that our spirits are maintained under proper control. So patience does not come naturally from the heart. It is very easy for us to get sucked into the emotions of the situation, especially when it's your own child. And I've noticed that it hurts way more when it's your own, right? Because disciplining, in school, when you're a teacher, but when it's your child and they test your patience, it's almost like it cuts deep. And only God is able to give us that patience that we need. I have a friend that, it's a family friend, he says, I used to think I was a converted young man. And then I got married. I realized I was not, because I had areas of my life that were tested and it brought it to the surface. But finally, we've worked through our issues, and I again thought, okay, now I'm converted again. And then he said, I had my first child, and I realized I was not converted. And then that child now became a teenager, and I'm at the point of total conviction that I am not converted yet, because this child continually tests me, and oftentimes I've allowed my emotions to come to the surface. And so God brings spouses and children to our lives to bring our own weaknesses at times to the surface, and we have to make sure that we have that at check. So do not become impatient with your children, and they are imperfections, as has the Lord been with us. Very patient. Now, the mother, I'm not so sure why I'm having a hard time advancing here. Okay. Neither infants, children, or youth should hear an impatient word from father, mother, or any member of the household, for they receive impressions very early in life, and what parents make them today, they will be tomorrow and the next day and the next. So never an impatient word. The mother is to keep her words under perfect control. There are to be no loud voices command. Nothing is to be done that will develop a defiant spirit in the child. I like to say that the mother is the thermometer of the home, right? And maybe the husbands can agree with me that if your wife is not in the right spirit, you immediately see that being copied by the children, right? The wife is the thermometer of the home. If you woke up and you're having a bad day, you can be sure that the behavior of the children are usually going to follow along with the spirit that you have. And so it's very important for us as mothers to try to maintain level-headed, even though we go through the emotions, and women do go through ups and downs of emotions, but we have to try to maintain that level as much as possible, not to affect the emotions of the rest of the family. Now, the little ones, before they are a year old, they hear and understand what's spoken in reference to themselves. And I brought this quote up for one specific reason. I don't know why, but a lot of parents don't believe babies understand what's being spoken about them. Because they have not yet developed the ability to communicate does not mean that they don't have a certain understanding of what's spoken about them. And some children are spoken to either positively or negatively in front of them. And from babyhood, they're picking all that up and they're becoming who you are saying they are, right? So your child will become what you say they are. So, oh, this child is so difficult. He's so disobedient. He's so hard to manage. He gives us a hard time. We're having such a difficult time with it. And the parent is holding the child right in their arms. And they're saying all that. I recently had an interaction with a mom that has a 2-year-old. And the 2-year-old was actually coming towards her. And I made the comment before the child arrived. I said, she is such a sweet little girl. And as soon as they arrived to the mom, she goes, oh, yeah, she is my headache. And I was like, uh-oh, I shouldn't have said anything. And then on top of that, she said, her older sister was an angel at her age, but this child gives me such a headache. I'm like, this is only getting worse. Why did I even open my mouth, to say something positive about the child in her absence? And now the child is there, and all this negativity is coming from the mom. Now, this child, before they are a year old, they already understood. Now the child is almost 2.5. She knew exactly what the mom was saying about her. So we ought to be very careful what we say when our children are nearby, and what we also say, not as parents, to other people's children, right? Whether positive or negative, because a 2-year-old also understands how C-U-T-E she can be. And a parent, a friend, or a family member that is constantly praising the CUT-ness of this child, it's building up, and we, from babyhood, the children start to develop this idea of how wonderful they are, and me, and we run into much bigger problems later on. So we have to be very careful with what's being spoken to children and about children in their presence. One of the first lessons a child needs to learn is the lesson of obedience. Before he is old enough to reason, he may be taught to obey. Some parents think that they can let their little ones have their way in their babyhood, and then when they get older, they will reason with them. But this is a mistake. Begin in the baby life to teach obedience. I've heard a lot of parents say, oh, they change, they change so much. This is just a phase. It is true, children change, but children who are not taught to obey, they change, they become worse. So it's not the change that you were hoping to see, and this is why we have to begin the lessons of obedience when they are babies. Now, what if the child is too young? If the child is too young to reason with you, while they're too young to reason, divert their minds as best as you can. And often it's okay to redirect the mind of a crying baby to something else, right? A crying baby that wants something that is not to be given to them. Well, you can't reason with a crying baby and let them know, I'm so sorry, you can't have this right now, but you can easily redirect the mind of this child. And I find that the best 2 ways that we have found to redirect the minds of the children, number one is music. And start singing a different tune, Sing a song. Quickly, they are going to forget about what they wanted. And the second one is the outdoors. Bring the child outside. Nature has this powerful, soothing way for children that we sometimes can't get to as parents. And just by bringing them outside and diverting their minds from what they wanted, quickly they become distracted and the problem is there. But we don't ignore the fact that the child was screaming or throwing themselves to the ground. We tell them this is not allowed. Mommy is not going to be able to give you that of which you were asking. Let's see if we can find something else to do. And then go on to singing or go on outside. And that way you can correct the behavior, right? Now, what if the child is too young? Mothers should not allow them to pound their heads on the floor. Let the mothers educate them in their infancy. Commence with the songs of Bethlehem. These soft tunes will have a quieting influence. I guess here is the quote that talks about music. I don't know. We sang over and over and over and over when the kids were little. And it's very interesting to see that now, anytime my 7-year-old is holding a baby and this baby begins to fuss and cry, the first thing she does is sing to the child. Like, I don't even have to tell her, sing to her. She'll begin, "A merry heart." And these are the tunes that we used to sing to her as a baby. I think her body just tells her, fidgety baby, crying baby, annoyed baby, sing to them. And so she starts to sing, and immediately the child just stares and forgets all about their problems. Now, I will touch a little bit on church reverence. And please don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to pick on anyone. I have 2 kids, and they are real kids, right? To the point that I do remember when I think it was my oldest child, when she found out she had a voice, she was about seven months old. I told my husband one day, I don't think I should go to church anymore. He said, what are you talking about? And I said, well, I don't pay attention. You don't pay attention. She doesn't pay attention. And nobody else within 5 pews behind us or ahead of us can pay attention because this child has found her voice and she's constantly blah, 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 blah. And I said, and we go to a church that is super quiet. So the first child that goes, bah, half the church looks back. And it makes you feel like it's time to go home, And so we got to be very patient with the parents with little ones because the children just realize that they have a voice and they don't yet understand that it's time or it's not time to speak. But I think I will focus mostly on the reverence for older children, right? My first point will be, though, the curse causeless shall not come. Proverbs 26, verse 2. Anytime you have a child that is unable to stay reverent in church, and this child is beyond, babyhood phase where they're still figuring out their voice, we have to try to figure out why. Why is it that this child is unable to sit still at church? And a lot of times, the issue comes from the home government. If you are not having proper home government, it's very difficult to try to govern your children on the 7th day. If they are not governed from 1 through 6, on the 7th, it's going to be much difficult. So you have to pay attention to your home government so that you can be satisfied with your church government. So try to ascertain the cause. Like if you have managed your home government and your child is still having issues at the church, try to ascertain. A lot of times kids are irritable because either they are hungry, they didn't eat enough for breakfast, or they ate too many sweets for breakfast, and then they're just bouncing with energy, and it's so difficult to sit still and to be quiet. And so a lot of times we may be the very reason why this child is unable. And what kind of influences and entertainment are we giving to the child? If this child is constantly on screens, if the child is constantly in front of televisions, sitting through an hour sermon is torturous because it's not like television, it's very different. And so what are we feeding our children physically and spiritually and to their minds plays an important role on what they will behave like at the church. And, reverence at church begins at home. There's a quote there. So for my oldest child, what has really helped her to stay focused now, because now at the age of 7, I'm not having the issues I had when she was 2, but now I'm actually wanting her to pay attention. She's not going to understand everything, but there's a certain level of communication there that she can pick up. And so we got a book from some friends of ours that have notes, worship church service notes, and these are her notes from last Sabbath sermon. She doesn't understand the whole thing, but she understands enough. By the way, the name of the preacher was Honey. That's my husband. This is how my children call him. I know it's sad. He wishes they called him Daddy, but both the girls call him Honey. And so Honey preached, and she wrote there, he was preaching on Balaam. And you probably may not be able to read what she wrote, but she was saying Balaam was a bad Christian because he walked away from God, and he was very greedy because he wanted more money. He wanted the goods from the king. And then on the next page, so it goes, who preached the Bible verses from the sermon, what I have learned, the part that I like the most. And on the second page, it's always like that. Every Sabbath, it's 2 pages. You're supposed to draw part of the sermon. And so she drew there. You can see Balaam and the donkey and the angel, and the donkey is asking, why are you hitting me? And so this is the creativity of a 7-year-old, but she was able to stay still, to be quiet, take her own notes, and I would gladly keep this forever, to remember this phase of her life. Now, is my 5-year-old there yet? No, she definitely is not. But give her one piece of paper and a pen. That's all it takes. She will be drawing what she can, writing what she can. And so if your child is old enough to know what to do with a pen or a pencil and a piece of paper, it's one way of keeping them with their mouths shut. But where am I now? Okay, reverence at church begins at home. This is a point that I want to make here. Fathers and mothers, teach your children that they must be subordinate to the law. Do not allow them to think that because they are children, it's their privilege to make all the noise they wish in the house. So we're not talking about the church here. We're talking about the home. Now, even at home, I can't make any noise. Well, a certain amount of noise is acceptable, but to be just loud is not what she is recommending here. Wise rules and regulations must be made and enforced, that the beauty of the home life may not be spoiled. Parents do their children great wrong when they allow them to scream and cry. They should not be allowed to be careless and boisterous. If these objectionable traits of character are not checked in their early years, the children will take them with them, strengthened and developed into religious and business lives. So here, your home behavior is going to be brought to church. Children will be just as happy if they were taught to be quiet in the house. Now, are we creating little robots? No, that's not what we're talking about. But we're talking about children who know that there are limits to even their noise in the home circle. Oh, but some parents say, Sabbath school and church will fix that. Well, do not depend upon the teachers of the Sabbath school to do your work of training your children in the way they should go. Sabbath school is a complementary moment to enrich your child's spiritual experience that you have nurtured for 6 days at home. It's not the day to come and fix all your child's problems in Sabbath school. The Sabbath school is a great blessing. It may help you in your work, but it can never take your place. Don't expect church to fix your child's problems. Children's problems are fixed at home. Mommy and daddy are responsible for them, okay? Now, I will touch lightly on family planning because I believe it's very important the way one child is raised and the influence they have on the second child. I'm not here trying to tell you how many children you should have. I wish I could have more. I love having children. But we must be careful not to have them faster than we can control them, right? Because parents should not increase their families any faster than they know that their children can be well cared for and educated. And I'm not talking here about your financial means. I'm talking here about your ability to show that child that you are authority before number 2 comes, and that 1 and 2 know Mom and dad are authority before number 3 comes. And this is because sibling influence is very strong. Notice she says, what an influence a sister may have over brothers. If she is right, she may determine the character of her brothers. Her prayers, her gentleness, and her affection may do much in a household. And I remember the first time I read this quote, I was living in the home of the Trojan family. And Therese was about 16 years old, and I could clearly see the quote in action. I was like, look at this. The 16-year-old is setting this wonderful example, and she's got all these little siblings following behind. And whatever she would do, they would go and follow her. And I prayed when I had my first pregnancy. I said, Lord, give me a girl. Not that the boys don't have the ability of showing their younger siblings, but the quote was so personable. And the Lord granted my request. Well, he granted it twice, because then the second one was a girl too. But I wanted to see the positive influence that an older sister has. And I think maybe it mentions the sister because the girls are more, they gravitate towards more caring for the younger sibling than boys do. And so that's the positive influence that she can have. But it's not just girls. Here it says the first child especially should be trained with great care, for he will educate the rest. Children grow according to the influence of those who surround them. And I've always, especially to my older child, have repeated to her the great responsibility she has as being the older sister. And it's not like I'm trying to pressure her, but she needs to understand I'm a leader here in the home, because monkey see, monkey do is her little sister. Whatever she does, little one follows right behind. And I keep telling her, look at the positive influence that you may have, but also the negative one. So you have to be very careful as an older sibling, and this is a message for kids too. As an older sibling, you have a great responsibility of teaching your little brothers and sisters what they ought to do and what they ought not to do. One disobedient child will do great harm to those with whom he associates, for he will fashion other children after his own pattern. And it's not only siblings here, because that connection can be done at church. Unfortunately, there are many church kids whom I don't have a pleasure in having my children mingle with. And it's in God's house, because of the negative influence that they receive. Of course, we ought to connect, we ought to be lights. But it's very sad when you have friends who have access to the same literature, to the same instructions that you do, but are raising their children in a much different way. And we must guard our firstborn especially to be a great light and a great missionary in the home. Now, I'm going to go over a few general tips on how to be a good disciplinarian. These are based on, of course, the inspired writings, as well as in a couple books that I have here. The first general tip is to be a disciplined parent. Sorry, there's a typo there. To be disciplined is to do that which you don't feel like doing simply because it's important to do. So to be a good disciplinarian, you have to be disciplined yourself. And why is that? Well, you can't tell a child to do something that you are not doing yourself, right? And a lot of times I find that the type of diet that we choose, your devotional life, your emotions as parents, or even the entertainment that we choose can make us not be positive disciplinarians, because you're not able to properly discipline your children when you don't have a disciplined life yourself. Children are watching every one of your moves. Every single one of your moves are being watched by your children, and they will mirror that behavior. And one of the biggest challenges in parents that I find in parenting is to see my defects of character implanted in my children. I don't know if you've been able to pick up some of those, but sometimes when I analyze their misbehavior, I'm like, I think they learned that from me, and it hurts. I tell you, it really hurts to see some of your defects of character implanted on your children. And so be disciplined yourself. Have routine, have regularity, so that you have healthy habits, which is the second point here. Fathers and mothers are responsible for the health, the constitution, the development of the character of their children. No one should be left to see this work. So we are not provoking our children to wrath when we are helping them form healthy habits, because children who have no regularity in sleep, no regularity in diet, that are not out in the fresh air, that are not spending enough time in nature, who are not exercising, who do not have temperance, we are provoking our children to wrath. And my husband has come home a few days, and for lunch, he will come home for lunch, and if he sees that the kids are challenging in any way, his first question to me is, how much time have you spent outside this morning? And if the answer is no time, we had no time this morning, he'll say, all right, kids, pick up your shoes, we're going out for a walk. And it's like they come back transformed. They've gone through the cleansing wave. And I'm like, what happened to these children, But it's life-changing to bring the kids outside. It's refreshing, and they come back with a completely different attitude. So how about their diet? Well, a lot of times mothers plan to accomplish a certain amount throughout the day, but when the children begin troubling her, instead of taking the time to soothe the child, to give the attention they need, or to divert them, she gives them something to eat to keep them still. Well, it's not time to eat, and you start feeding that child, and that issue is only going to grow. So it answers the purpose for a short time, but eventually makes things worse. Well, for two reasons. First, you are teaching this child that there is no regularity, right? There's no regularity in eating. You're just feeding the child with what they're not asking for. They're asking for attention, you give them food. And early in life, the child is associating their negative state of mind with food. So anytime I'm frustrated, I'm given food. Anytime I'm angry, I'm given food. And anytime I'm tired, mom gives me food. Anytime I'm impatient, mom gives me food. And this could be one of the reasons why we have a great number of people nowadays that are unable to even control their appetites, because any little emotions they have, they go to food for that. And so we have to be very careful with the health of our children. We make their choices. We make their dietary choices, and we can give them a certain window of opportunity for choices they want to make within the boundaries that we have already created. Number 3, filter your children's entertainment. Now, I've already spoken about the screen time, children who are allowed to have screen time or a lot of screen time, even when the material is spiritual. There's a lot of spiritual material out there. Some of them are actually very good, but there is a certain age that if they are given the opportunity to just sit there and watch that continuously, it's more detrimental to their health than if they did not see the spiritual material given to them, right? So we ought to spend time with the children and not just hand them the iPad or hand them the phone. They become very irritable. They lack concentration. So we must help our children choose their entertainment. And these I will mention: books, even pictures can be, even if the child can't read, if the pictures are not really depicting God and creation and nature, they shouldn't be given to young children, right? And we need to be filtering also through their toys. So here we have screens and books. We need to be the filter for their music, the music the children are listening to. It can be very stimulant. It can be very melancholic, and you need to just have this child who's constantly a melancholic child. And so parents, be the filter for your children, and even their toys. There are some toys that are very stimulant to children, Sometimes I go into people's homes and I just want to get the battery out of all their toys, because it's just like, how can they handle this over and over? And the parent just gets to the point where their ears just shut off to it and they don't hear. But you come into that scenario and it's very disturbing. And even their friends. We ought to be the filter for our children's friends. When does that finish? Well, it doesn't ever finish, because even when they are young adults, they can still make bad choices on their friendships. And I believe parents should have the right to instruct their children on their friends. Number 4, be in tune with your spouse. Now, of course, this is a general positive rule, but especially in raising children, if one is too permissive and the other one is too strict, you're going to create great confusion in the home. Can two walk together except they agree? The answer is no. Can two raise a child except they agree? The answer is also no. So being raised in a home where you have a strict parent and a permissive parent is you're basically setting up the kid for a constant war and confusion. Child guidance says right principles must be established in the mind of the child. If parents are united in this work of discipline, the child will understand what is required of him. But if the father, by word or look, shows that he does not approve of the discipline the mother gives, if he feels that she's too strict and thinks that he must make up for the harshness by petting and indulgence, the child will be ruined. And a lot of times it can be the opposite. The mother can think that the father is too strict, and she will indulge that child to make up for the strictness of the father. And you may not always agree at the moment on how things should be done. And I think this is why God was very wise in setting up the home kingdom, right? That there is a leader, and the mother, whether she agreed or not, at that moment, it's better to zip it up. And you can talk later when the children are not around, so that maybe that mistake, if it's a mistake, is not repeated later. And I've even used texting. There's a blessing through texting right now. If there is something that we strongly believe shouldn't be done that way, and the parent, not knowing that the one strongly believed it should be done that way, made a different choice, I'm not going to say it out loud, because I don't want to be defiant to my husband in front of my children. But I have used text message, and I have sent him a text and just that look, check your phone. And he would check his phone and he'd be like, well, I didn't know it was of that importance to you. And so we can try to work things out while the kids are still around. But if possible, wait for a later moment, right? Unless it's an emergency, like a text message can't really help. But as long as it's not done in front of the child, it's much better. Now, number 5, set your rules and expectations ahead of time. When you go into someone's home, if you have rules that you want your child to follow, it's not the time to do it when you're already there, right? It's before you leave the house. We are going to go do certain things. There will be people there that may believe differently, and they may be seeing or playing with this or doing that. We believe that it would be best for you not to do that. Did you understand? So you have your rules and your expectations set ahead of time, and not at the heat of the moment there trying to make your child understand that that was not appropriate. Give warnings as to the timing of activities. And you know what? This is a lifesaver, especially with the younger children, to just tell them when they are having fun, it's time to go to the shower. And it's like, and as much as you want to obey, it's so hard, because showering is not as fun as playing ball. And so what has always helped us is to give them a warning. In 10 minutes, it's going to be time for the shower, and you wait for a response. Did you understand? Yes. Okay. In 5 minutes, it's time for the shower. When I say it is time for the shower, you've known for 10 minutes, it's no surprise to you. And so the disappointment and the delay is a lot less that way. Do not use threats, right? If punishment is needed, if you see that the child has disobeyed and she needs a punishment, it's better to punish than to threat. Because after all, most parents that are constantly threatening children, they are never going to discipline them, right? It ends on the threat. We're just threatening. I'm going to hit you. I'm going to spank you. I'm going to slap you. And it just never happens. So I like to say, even when we count 1, 2, 3, I was raised on the 1, 2, 3. It has some effect, right? My mom would say, Daniele, 1. And I knew she's mad. When she would say 2, I would say she is more mad. When she said 3, I knew she was very mad. But when we do that to our children, we're basically giving them 3 opportunities to disobey you, because they know, okay, I got away with the 1. As long as I don't reach peak of number 3, I can continually disobey her. And so using 1, 2, 3 is not always the best solution, because the child will test how far I can get to 3 by not really tapping into 3 and getting the consequence. So instead of threatening, you can give warnings. And I'll give you an example. My youngest child was very fidgety at the table, very fidgety. And it was very hard. And we would always tell her, I said, well, Lauren, if you leave the table, you lose the opportunity of finishing your food. And I don't really want you to be hungry for the rest of the morning. This was breakfast time. I don't want you to be hungry for the rest of the time. So what do you think you should do? That's what I would ask her. And she would be like, well, I think I should sit down. So, well, I think that's a great idea. It's basically a reminder, right? If you leave, it's a way of telling her what most parents will do. If you leave the table one more time, I'm going to take your food away. That's a threat. So basically, it's a modified threat to a warning. You know what happens when you leave the table. Your food may get taken away. What do you think you should do right now? Do you think you should sit down, or do you think you should keep walking? Well, I think I should sit down. Well, you've made a great choice. Now, if she leaves the table one more time, what do you think I should do? Take the food away, right? She knows the rule. She's being reminded of the rule with the modified threat into a warning. And it's time for her to learn that the food has been taken away because I've asked you not to leave the table. So it's as simple as that. You don't need to yell or use threats to bring a child back to remembrance of the behavior that they should have. Number 8, name their feelings when correcting them. And I guess this is one of the principles and concepts of this new way of dealing with children that I think it's actually positive, because when a child is frustrated, and you name what feeling you are observing that child has, it's a way of connecting with them before correcting them, right? So I'm not just going to say, oh, I know you're so frustrated, and it finishes there. No. So what I usually do with the kids is, well, I'm sure you're very frustrated when the child is trying to put the shoe on by herself and she cannot, and she just throws the food on the ground and starts crying. And I would get down and I'll be like, oh, I can see you're very frustrated that you can't put your shoes. And I would be frustrated too. But do you really think that doing what you did is going to help your shoe be put on? And the answer was no. And I said, well, so what other way can you show me that you need help putting your shoe rather than throwing the shoe on the ground? Well, I can ask you for help. It's like, oh, that would be much better, right? But first you connect with the child. I can see and I can hear that you're very frustrated. But you know what? You can be frustrated and show me a different way of asking for help. And so connect with your child before you correct them. And number 9, stop everything before correcting. It's very easy for me to be washing dishes, washing lettuce, and I hear the kids fighting over a toy in the living room. My tendency is to say, girls, no fighting over toys, please, over there in the living room, while you just keep doing your work. It just goes here and goes out there. They don't even hear you. It's like you're not there. And so stop whatever you're doing and go directly to the child and speak them in a kind way. It says here, I never allowed in correcting my children, even my voice to be changed. I don't know. This is not me. This is Ellen White, because my voice has changed many times, and we must try to keep it under control. And it's only through the help of God. Take a deep breath. Go on a timeout. We're quick to put kids in timeout, but sometimes we need the timeout ourselves. Take 5 minutes and go pray and go ask God for patience, because it's very easy to scream. Now, if it is an emergency, please do scream. If you see a car coming and your child is on the way, screaming is not the issue. It's showing your frustration when it's not an emergency. Number 10, rebuke in private. And I would tell you that if my daughter was here, this would be her number 1 rule. My oldest child is extremely self-conscious, and she does not handle well when she's rebuked in public. And I believe that no other child should be rebuked in public as much as possible. So if we are in need of rebuke and there's people around, whisper in their ears. They don't need to be ashamed so that you can reach their hearts, right? Sometimes we feel like if I embarrass them in front of everyone, maybe they won't do this ever again. Well, they may not for the sake of embarrassment, but have we really remedied the issue? No, right? So we have to reach the hearts of the children by speaking to them in their ears, speaking to them in privately. Humiliation and shame, they do not educate. And even at home, lately, I have noticed that my older child is even ashamed of being rebuked in front of her younger sibling. And so if the reason for rebuke has nothing to do with her sister, I will bring her to the room and privately and close the door because her sister does not need to know what she's being rebuked about, okay? So try not to embarrass your children, to try to reach their hearts. Number 11, encourage them to apologize and what they are apologizing for. Now, by encouraging, I'm not saying you have to force the child to go in there and say, I'm sorry, when it's like coming totally from the mouth and not from the heart. But reach the point where the child has understood the need for apology. But when I come to that, it's not just going and saying sorry. I always ask, what are you asking forgiveness for? When they come to me and they say, Mom, sorry. And I know what they're asking for, but I want them to say. And sometimes she will say, well, you know. And I says, yeah, I do know. But I want you to tell me what you're apologizing for because maybe it's something else. And so have them remember, okay, I'm sorry and I'm apologizing because of the way that I spoke to you. It was disrespectful. Okay, you're forgiven and move on. Now, have reasonable requests. Your goal is to make your child succeed and not fail. We don't need to set up traps for the children, right? They're not rats. They're children. So we don't set traps for them. And I feel that sometimes parents will ask of a child more than they can accomplish. And I will give you an example. I can give my older child 3 commands. I can tell her, Lila, please go to your bedroom, pick up your clothes from the floor, open up your curtains, and make your bed. And I'll repeat it twice, and she'll be like, okay. And I know she is able to do that. She's able to remember that. If I do this to my younger child, by the time she gets to the hallway, she does not remember the first command, right? And so if I expect from her to have the same ability that my older child has, I'm setting up a trap for her because she's going to come back not doing any of the 3, and she's labeled the disobedient child. And so understand, how much can this child handle? How much information can she handle? So give one order at a time. When you're done finishing that, come back to mommy. I have something else for you. And it almost gives them this sense of suspense. And they want to finish that one quickly to come back and see what. But if you give them a long list, they just feel overwhelmed and don't remember any of them. 12, have reasonable requests. Sorry, this was actually the point that I forgot to put up here. 13, make a clear distinction between a suggestion and a command. So how do you make a clear distinction between a suggestion and a command? We are constantly dialoguing with the children, and oftentimes we're making suggestions and not commands. So when you're playing with a child, you say, or you want to play, you say, oh, let's play dolls when we're done with school. Is this a suggestion or a command? It's a suggestion, right? Oh, let's play dolls when we're done with school. This is a suggestion. Now, if I tell my child, I need you to go pick up your clothes that you left on the bathroom floor, is this a suggestion or a command? This is a command. It's easy for an adult to distinguish, but it's not so easy for a child. So how can you make that easier? Well, we've added an okay at the end of it. I need you to go to your room and pick up the clothes that you left on the floor. Okay? That okay demands a response. And the response is one of the 2, okay or yes. Okay? So when you put that okay at the end, it clearly gives a distinction of this is mom suggesting something or this is mom's command and not just a suggestion. Show your older children, especially, that you trust in them. And I put this here because it's very easy for us as parents to give a command to a child and go after them to check up on them, to make sure they did. And To a certain extent, if it's an emergency, if it's something really important, okay. But if it's something such as, could you please go and make up your bed or fix up your room? I saw that it needed some organization. And the child goes, they spend 10 minutes over there. And when they come back, the mother's right is to ask, have you finished the job that I asked you? And the child will say yes. What do you think she should do then? She'll move on, right? She should believe that they did, rather than, I'm going to go check up on you. And if you didn't do that, you're going to go back there and blah, 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 blah. What did you show your child right now? You don't trust them, right? And so we must show our children that we trust them. Now, will they always be true to their words? Unfortunately not. There are times that they will think they did and they will say they did and they did not. But I will wait for the opportunity to accidentally find out, oh, as I was walking down the hallway, I turned to the left and I saw that your bed was not made. And I will give them the benefit of the doubt. Did you forget? Well, I did forget. And sometimes, honestly, 90% of the time with little children, they do forget, right? So show your child that you trust them by not always going back and checking up on them. Always commend them. Commend your child when they obey. It's very easy for us to rebuke, and we often forget to commend when they give genuine obedience, right? So if your child, especially in a point that they have been lacking obedience, the day they do obey, make sure you commend them. Well, I'm very, very proud of you today. And this happened to me at church today. My oldest daughter wanted to use the restroom. And it was halfway through the sermon. I had already taken her to the bathroom. And I said, I took you before the church service began. I would love for you to wait. And I could see she was struggling. And I said, I will take you as soon as the sermon is finished. But when he finished the sermon, I said, I'll take you as soon as the prayer is finished. And I thought he was going to pray. And he said, we are first going to sing and then we're going to pray. So she looked at me in desperation, right? And I looked at her and I said, well, the prayer is going to be after the song. I could take you now, but it would be much better if you were able to wait. And that's all it took. She was willing to wait. And so when we went to the bathroom, I told her, I said, I'm very proud of you because you could have told me. You said when the sermon was over, you're going to take me. And she had the right to go, but she was willing to. I'm going to wait. If this is much better, then I'm going to wait. So commend your children. And when they've done something that it was an effort for them to do, commend them. And give inducements when appropriate, right? It's a biblical principle to give inducements. And things such as, if you finish the job that I've given you in the next 10 minutes, you will get 10 minutes of jumping in the trampoline. This is outside of your playtime. But because you were quick in finishing your job, I will give you 10 minutes in the trampoline. Teach the results of disobedience from Bible stories, right? You don't need to be targeting those stories constantly. But if you know your child is struggling to surrender to your obedience requests, bring out those stories every now and then, stories like Jonah, stories of Samson. Bring stories that will, that they can relate to the Bible character and that they can see the consequences that come from being disobedient. Now, create a visual aid for their obedience goals. And this works well with young children. So when my oldest child was little, we ordered from this lady who made felt board. It's called the Obedience Tree. And it came with a little basket for red fruits. And next to it was a little basket with black fruits. And it doesn't have to be this. It could be anything. But it was just a visual aid for her to see the fruits that she was producing in her tree of obedience throughout the day. And so every time she would obey me cheerfully, thoroughly, I would tell her, I am so proud of you. You can go and you can put a red apple on your tree. And she would go. And the times where, unfortunately, she was disobedient, I would tell her, well, sometimes our fruits are not good fruits. And I want you to see what the tree looks like once we put those fruits up there. And she would pick up a little black apple and put up on the tree. Now, sometimes she would have 2 or 3 black apples halfway through the day, and she would be desperate to get rid of them. The idea was to wait until the end of the day, and we would reflect on how our day went and ask Jesus for forgiveness and get rid of all the black fruits and start our day afresh with a blank tree the next day. She could not wait till 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and she would be like, Mom, we need to get those black fruits out of there. And oftentimes I would kneel down and pray with her throughout the day, and I would say, Jesus is able to forgive anytime we ask for forgiveness. And we would pray, and I'm like, you can get all your black fruits out of there. And she would be so happy. Now, it works with some children. It doesn't work with others. With my younger child, it became a joke, really. I would put a black fruit on the tree. I would walk away. She had 3 red ones, no black left. And I'm like, what happened here? She was the queen of her own tree, and she thought she had the right to come and take and remove. So it may not work for everybody, but it did work for my oldest child. And it created an impression on her. Children tend to forget their mistakes. And by reminding them that there are times when we produce positive and negative fruits, it was helpful for her to see. Now, memorize and repeat the golden rule. Do to others as you would like for them to do it to you. Be willing to apologize to your child. Now, I bring up this point because a lot of times we make mistakes and we realize after the children went to bed that maybe we were too harsh, that we weren't patient, or we said something that we shouldn't have said. And we think, oh, by tomorrow they won't remember. And it may be true, but we still ought to apologize for the times that we feel that we haven't done right. And I have had evenings that I will lay on my bed and I will think, I could have done this differently. I could have said this in a different way. And I will be bothered. And I know it's the Holy Spirit convicting me of that. And I will make a point to apologize to them as soon as they wake up in the morning. And I've never been turned away. I mean, the child who receives an apology from a parent gives such a genuine forgiveness that it's almost like God's forgiveness to us. They are always so willing to forgive no matter how harsh you were. And so always be willing to apologize. And 21, correct at the right moment. We only have 3 more to go. Wait for the right moment to correct a child. Desire of Ages 4:32 says, Jesus read their thoughts and he longed to counsel and instruct them. He's talking about the disciples. But for this, he awaited a quiet hour when their hearts should be open to receive his word. Impulsive people like to deal with the situation at the moment, but children that have not been given time to reflect on what they have done may not reach the point of repentance. And so to try to punish a child and correct a child at the heat of the moment when they have a wave of emotions going through, you may have very little or no results. And so it's always best to give some time. Of course, when they are very little, their memory is very short. But when they're older, they will remember. Even if it's been a few hours that you've waited, they will remember what they've done. And I will share with you an experience I had with my oldest child when she was about 4 years old, I think. We were packing granola, and she knows she's never eaten outside of meal times since birth, that we don't eat in between meals. And that day, I could see she asked, can I taste the granola? And I said, well, we can taste it at lunchtime, but it's not time to eat right now. But I really wanted it. And I said, I understand, but it's not time to eat. And I walked away. And when I came back, she was. And I looked at her and I said, did you taste the granola? And she goes, mm-mm. And I'm like, oh no, what should I do? I mean, it's like she thinks she's fooling me. I can see her mouth is full. What do you do? I wanted to rebuke her right there, but the thing was so sweet in her mouth at that moment. How am I going to convince her that was a bad idea at that moment? It was just not the right time to try to convince her when the thing is just so crunchy and sweet in my mouth. So I said, you know what? I'm going to wait. Maybe she's going to be bothered by it. This was morning time. Lunch went by, afternoon went by, evening came by, no word from her. And I got concerned. I was like, Lord, I think it's time for me to do something, but I don't want to just blank tell her, I know you're lying to me, So I lay down next to her bed that evening and I said, I'm going to tell you a story. There was once a little girl who really loved cake. And she wanted to eat a piece of cake so bad. Her mom had just made this cake and the whole house smelled like the cake. It was so sweet. And she wanted a piece of that cake and her mom told her, it's not time to eat the cake yet. You got to wait until tonight. And one time her mom walked away from the kitchen and this little girl went into the kitchen and she took a tiny little piece of that cake. And the cake was so sweet in her mouth. She loved it. Do you like cake? Yes, I love cake. And I said she loved it too. But you know what? Her mom asked her, did you eat a piece of the cake? Because I see a piece of the cake missing here. And she said, no, I did not. Do you think she did the right thing? She was starting to get disturbed. I said, oh yeah, she was so sorry to say that, but she didn't have courage to tell her mom she did because she thought her mom was going to punish her. And the day went on and she started to feel very disturbed. She was so disturbed with that. She couldn't take it anymore until it was bedtime. And she finally decided, with Jesus' help, that she was going to go to her mom and tell her mom that she made a mistake, that she lied. And do you think lying is a good idea? I said, yeah, lying is not a good idea. And so she went to her mom and she said, Mom, I want to say sorry. And Mom said, sorry for what? She says, because I did eat the piece of cake that you told me not to. And do you know what her mother told her? Well, I'm very sorry that you lied, but I am very happy that you've allowed the Holy Spirit to speak to your heart and tell you that you needed to come and confess your sins to me. So isn't that a nice story? Silence. I was like, Isn't that a nice story? And then I just stopped. And it only took a few seconds. And she said, Mom, yes, I'm sorry. This is sorry for what? Well, because when you told me not to eat the granola, well, it was very small. It was very little, but I did take it. And I said, well, I'm very glad that you're so I basically reiterated the story from the girl to shifted the character, right? And that settled the argument. And I told her, I would like to trust in you. And I want to be able to leave you in the kitchen with food lying around because I know you're going to obey my word. And since that day, I've never again had a problem. She will call me. She will ask friends to call my number if she's not with me and someone asks her food and she's not sure it's time to eat. Now, her sister is a different story. She will eat and then she will tell me she did. But recently, at the age of 5, I received the first phone call from the little one, and she will call and she will say, Mom, is it time for me to have a juice? Somebody's trying to give me juice. And if I tell her it is, happily she will take it. If it's not, she will take it happily too. But it took the correction at the right moment. If I had pinned her against the wall, made her open her mouth, spit out the granola, it would not have the same effect because it was sweet in the mouth. But I had to wait until it became sour in the belly for her to come to that conviction that she had made a mistake. 22, do not make hasty decisions. The word of the parents should be law. And here is something that we do sometimes not thinking about it. The child will come and you're busy and they'll say, Mom, can I do such and such and such a thing? And the quick answer is no. I've done that many times. But what happens is you didn't even pay attention to what the child was saying. And it may be a reasonable request. And later on you will think about it. And you're like, well, actually, I think you can go ahead and do that. Well, what's the child going to learn? That if I am persistent and I keep telling you, you can change your word. And so the best answer to give is, I'll think about that. And my children must think I have 12 brains because I'm constantly thinking about that. But you got to be faithful and actually do think about that and come back with the answer. The answer is yes or the answer is no. Do not give in to their tantrums. Many gratify every unreasonable wish because it's easier to be rid of their importunity in this way than in any other way. A child should be so trained that a refusal would be received in the right spirit and accepted as final. Now, I will give a clear example of how this should be implemented. One example that I like to use is a child that does not like to sit in her car seat, right? Once you put a child in the car seat, they start screaming and crying. If you're bothered by the screaming and crying of the child and you remove them from the car seat when it's not safe to remove them from the car seat, what do you think the child was going to do the next day? Scream and cry. And if you don't take them out, they'll scream and cry louder because they will think, if I do it louder, I'm going to get my way. And so if the child knows the car seat is the place they need to ride on from the doorstep of one destination to the other, no matter how loud they cry or scream, that child should not be taken out unless the car is stopped, because you will give the child the impression that if they cry tomorrow, they're going to get taken out of there, right? Or a child that does not want to wear proper winter attire to go outside. You insist, you must put your head on or we can't go outside. You must put your head on. And now the time is ticking. You got to get out the door. And this child is not putting their head on. And because you're late, you're, okay, just go. Well, tomorrow, they're going to wait until you're late to show you that they're not going to wear the proper clothing. And so you can stay home. You can stay with daddy if you're not willing to put your winter attire. And I've had to leave my children behind because I said, to leave the home, you've got to wear this, this, this. If you don't comply, you can make your choice. You have to stay back because to leave the home, we have to dress according to the weather. And so don't give in to their tantrums because you're afraid of, I'm not gonna be able to bring them back into control. So I'm just gonna give in right now and wait for a next time to correct. And number 24, have order and regularity. James already read this quote this morning. One well-ordered, well-disciplined family tells more on behalf of Christianity than all the sermons that can be preached. Number 25 and last, if your child has made a mistake, if she repents and she confesses her mistake to you and feels truly sorry for what she has done, this child does not need punishment, right? Your children may have done something demands punishment, but if you deal with them in the spirit of Christ, their arms will be thrown about your neck. They will humble themselves before the Lord and will acknowledge their wrong. That is enough. They do not need punishment. I will tell an experience I had with my two girls. They were in the car by themselves. We were getting ready to leave, and they had this doll that has a cloth body and a hard head. And so the head is heavier than the body and easily goes like this. And apparently, I didn't know what was happening. I just heard the little one crying. She was 2. The older was 4. And so when I went to the car, she was sobbing. And I asked the older one, what happened? And she said, the doll hit her in the face. It had happened before. I believed her 100%. So I got in the car and we left, and I forgot something at the house. So I drove back, and when I came out of the house the second time, I saw my oldest child in the car seat looking like she was about to cry. And I said, what happened? And she said, come here. So I went to her car seat, and she told me, she said, I need to tell you the truth. And I said, what truth? She said, well, the doll hit her face, but it only hit her face because I was trying to get the doll from her and she was trying to take it from me, and I pulled hard and I let it go. And when I let it go, it went boom, right on her face. So basically, she didn't tell me the whole story. I think she was afraid of the punishment, and she was so bothered by it, she could not wait 10 more minutes to tell me. And I could see she was about ready to start crying, and immediately she said, I'm very sorry that I did that. And I knew it was a genuine repentance because the 2-year-old would never be able to tell me the story as it went, and I would never find out. There was nobody there to tell me otherwise, and she was truly repentant. Does this child need punishment? No, she was truly convinced that I've made a mistake and I needed to make it right with my mom, and she apologized to her sister, and that was the end of it. There is not a one-size-fits-all. We need to be led by the Holy Spirit through prayer. He knows the burdens of every mother, and he is her best friend in every emergency. His everlasting arms support the God-fearing, faithful mother, and difficulties will arise, okay? And especially when you pray for patience, it's almost like God gives you even more opportunities to exercise your patience with your children testing you even more. And I'm like, Lord, I just asked for more patience, not for more trials, but they will come in order for us to exercise that patience. So oftentimes, we think that we have converting power over our children, and I'm sorry to tell you, we do not. We can give our best as parents, but if it's not connected with prayer and asking God to give them the Holy Spirit, your job is going to be of little success. So we must surrender the children to Christ daily in order for us to see any good thing coming out of all the disciplinary procedures that we adopt. And I do have to tell you that it's not which disciplinary method you choose that proves your effectiveness. It is how often it is performed. Okay, so if you're going to choose whatever you are accustomed to in your home, if it's done 100% of the time, it's most likely guaranteed that you're going to be successful in it. But if you're slacking and overlooking mistakes and letting go of things that need to be addressed, no matter what method you choose, you're going to fail. So it's not the type that you choose, but it's how often it is performed. We're going to take a little break, and then I'm going to have a very practical, shorter lesson on different disciplinary procedures, right? What can we do now that we've learned it's important? Now that we've learned how it's to be conducted, it's going to be very practical on some ideas that you can use for your children. And I hope they can still be my friends, little ones, at the end of the next lecture. So let's pray and take a break. Father, as we've seen the importance of discipline, and we've seen that because you love us, you discipline us, help us to also love our children. First of all and foremost, to show them love, connection, affection, but help us, Lord, to know when it's time to correct. And please give each child here the desire to be corrected, Lord, and the desire to do what is right. In Jesus' name, amen.
The papers that Timothy and Tara's passed out, or Mark rather, I would request that you write down your questions, especially if you have little children. Please, Danielle has expressed this many times throughout her talk. It's so important not to embarrass them. So if you can write out your question and send it in, then you can be very specific if you have a specific need, and then your child will be protected. It will give you great advantage, and your child too. Thank you.
Sure, 10 minutes maybe. What time is it? Am I on my 10 minutes?
Make an announcement.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, I have a short announcement in between the break in case we get lost after this is all over and a few of y'all leave. After the presentation is over, do you have a question? No. Oh, okay. You're raising your hand. After the presentation is over, we're going to take a love offering, just like we do with all the speakers. Two people are standing at the back door. Danielle and James have committed their whole lives to the Lord's work. I've known them for years. James is probably one of the only people you'll ever meet that knew me before I was a Seventh-day Adventist. Danielle took care of my mother on her deathbed for months. Noah was in their wedding because he was CUTE.
Yes.
I told him that too much when he was little. I know. If I had another one, but he turned out okay. So after, and we might remind you again, but two people at the back door are going to be taking up a love offering when the presentation's finished. And it's going to go to James and Danielle.
Anyone need note paper? Anyone else? Like some paper to take notes?
Danielle, they have questions. Where do you want them to?
I'm not so sure. Maybe give to Verna. Yeah. You should give him to James. He's back here. So he can start looking and filtering through it. Okay. All right, let's start over again here. We will be talking about specific modes of discipline. Let's have a word of prayer before we begin. Father, now as we look into some ideas that we can implement on how to discipline our children, I pray that your spirit may be with us, that you may be guiding my words, and that we may use wisdom and discretion when we come into situations where they need to be punished and disciplined, Lord. Please help us to know what to do. In Jesus' name, amen. So every disobedience is a learning opportunity. I do like this quote because it is a learning opportunity not only for the child, but also for the parent. So every disobedience is a learning opportunity. And I think that when you put that in your mind, you already look at a disobedient child with different eyes, right? You're not just trying to drive me to complete insanity, but this is a God-given opportunity for you and I to learn something. So let's learn something together. This book, Studies in Character Building, there is a quote here that says, "The end sought by the parent in the punishment of a child should be the development and establishment of self-government in the child's character." So this is your main goal. When you're punishing a child, your main goal is to establish in their character the idea of self-government, because one day you're not going to be there anymore. But because this child was properly trained and punished, she will remember, wait, I know how to self-govern myself now. Punishment that fails in this respect is of little value. If the child does not understand, I am receiving this punishment because my mother and father are trying to teach me self-government, your punishment is going to be of no or little value. Let the child see that punishment is a remedial measure for his own good. The same way that he knows if he's got a broken arm, he needs a cast for that arm. If he's disobedient, he needs a punishment to remedy that disobedience, right? Get him to feel the necessity and importance of it, and you have planted the seed of self-government. You have to come to the point when the child realizes, I need this punishment in order to become a better person. Does that come naturally from the heart? No, nobody loves punishment. There is no such person that thrives in punishment. But a child who is from birth trained in a way that loving punishment is given and explained and made clear to him the reason why that punishment is given, he will understand this is like medication to my sick soul. And if I am sick, I need the medication for it, right? It's a treatment for the soul. It's a remedy for the disobedience. So we're going to go through 5 different modes of discipline. And I have based a lot of what I will be saying today here in 2 books. The first one is the one I showed this morning, Studies in Character Building. And these books were all written in like the 1800s. They have old English language, but they basically make the principles from Adventist home and child guidance that we looked through the previous lectures, they put them into practicality. And for me, a lot of times I read, a child should never once gain advantage over a mother. That's like child guidance page, whatever it is. And I look at it and I'm like, how? I mean, which child has never once ever gained advantage over a mother? And for me, these books have come to really help expand my view of the principle and how it can be applied in a loving way, but in a way that shows the child that the parent is authority. So here is the book, Gentle Measures. If you want to take a picture of that, it's available. Both books are available on Amazon. They are not so big, and I tell you, they are hard to put down because it's all full of stories and ideas that you can implement in your own life. And both books are talking about how a parent must and can enforce complete and willing submission to authority by using gentle measures. So basically, how can you gently teach your child that they must completely submit their will to yours without having to resort to harsh measures? And for me, that was the best of both worlds, right? I want my child to respect me. I want my child to submit her wills to mine, but I don't really want to resort to harsh punishments and harsh measures. And I highly recommend, if you're a parent, a teacher, a grandparent, whatever you are, to read these books. I have read them together with my husband. We've read them in parallel to Child Guidance and Adventist Home, and I have not found anything here that goes against the principle that God has given us. So 5 modes of discipline. Number 1 is verbal correction. Now, verbal correction is basically constantly instructing your child. It's used all day long. It's not necessarily brought in a negative light, but it's basically the job of the parent, right? Kids tend to forget things and they must be reminded throughout the day. So verbal correction can be used on its own. Verbal correction can be used paired, of course, with another mode of discipline. But verbal correction is essential to your day-to-day life with the child. Now, of course, when there is clear rebellion and it demands a punishment, verbal correction alone is not going to do the trick. But in most cases, if you catch the disease right in the beginning, you're able to remedy it with the most simple remedies, right? And the most simple of all is the verbal instruction and correction. Examples for that would be a child that continually comes to the house and forgets to remove her shoes. Please remove your shoes at the door. Mommy has asked you before, remember? Or a child that forgets to wash her hands after potty. So these are just daily reminders that you are constantly repeating to your child over and over and over again. And if repetition drives you crazy, have no children, because the life of the mother is repeat and repeat and repeat, right? So on verbal correction, I guess the most important point here is to guard your spirit. The way that you correct verbally can be more painful than a good spanking, right? So if you don't know how to correct verbally, you need to lay that at the foot of the cross and ask Jesus to help you, because it can be very painful. It can cut deeper than a big whipping on the behinds. And so we need to guard our words and to be very mindful of our spirit. So natural consequences is the second point. Now, natural consequences are the moments when life teaches the lessons and you just have to sit, relax, and enjoy the flight, right? An example of that would be a baby that continually throws things on the floor and the toy breaks. Well, mommy had told you not to throw that on the floor because it would break. The toy is broken. We don't get a chance to play with it anymore. Life brought its consequence. A child that keeps bouncing on the couch, bouncing and stepping and jumping on the couch when they're being told not to do that anymore. It's dangerous to do that. You may fall. Boom, the child fell, bumped the head. Now the child is crying. Does that child need more punishment? No. Life already brought its punishment. They've got a big boo-boo on the forehead. That was enough, right? So it's a natural consequence. Now, in the Bible, we find many stories that show how even adults have received consequences for not listening to verbal instruction. And some of those consequences were natural, and some of them were not so natural. They had to be enforced. And God is a God of love, but he's also a God of justice. And sometimes he brought those consequences to teach lessons, life lessons for those who did not heed to the verbal instruction. And the same pattern we see as we raise our children. They are not following the verbal instructions. Sometimes life will bring natural consequences, but sometimes we have to bring enforced consequences. So the first one is going to be enforced related consequences. And I'm going to skip here because I have there. Enforced consequences that are related to their transgression, we'll call it, right? The breaking of the rule. So basically, you are going to take advantage of the circumstance surrounding the disobedience and bring out a consequence that is related to that. And I will give examples of that. It doesn't require a whole lot of thinking. It just has to be done 100% of the time. So one example would be a baby that's self-feeding starts to throw food on the floor. And babies go through this phase where they want to feed themselves. They don't want you to feed them anymore. But they also go through the phase where they like to see the effects of gravity. And a mother that keeps telling the child, do not throw food on the ground, do not throw food on the ground, and the child continually is throwing food off the plate to the ground, what would be an enforced related consequence? Because you are throwing your food on the floor, you have lost your privilege to feed yourself. So mommy is now going to feed you. Was that harsh? Is the child still going to eat? Yes, but she's lost the ability to disobey because mom has taken it away from her. My children used to cry when we put them in the crib, and they would cry, and it was time to sleep, or they would be calling, mommy, mommy, mommy. And we were like, how do you teach them that it's no longer time to be calling, it's time to be quiet? So we would go verbal instruction, it's time to sleep, we needed to be quiet. As soon as you walk away, mommy, mommy, mommy. Next time I go in, I would tell them, because you continue to call me, I'm going to have to close the door because mommy and daddy need to sleep. They hated the closed door. It's almost like you created a wall of separation. And I would tell them, but as soon as you stop calling, I will come back and I will open the door. That's all it took. You know, if the door is closed and you're talking, it's going to remain closed. The moment I see you're done talking, I will come and I will open the door. So things like that. A child that continually says, it's mine. This is very common. It's mine, it's mine, it's mine. Half the time it's not theirs at all. And they say it's mine. Sometimes it is still theirs, but it's not acceptable in our home, this behavior of it's mine, it's mine. So we created an it's mine box and we labeled it, it's mine. Anytime you say it's mine, it goes into the it's mine box. Then it's not yours anymore. Half the time it was my own stuff. It was like kitchen spatulas and cups and containers, and I had my containers being held hostage in the it's mine box. But it's solved because they realized, if I say it's mine, I'm going to lose the privilege of playing with it for a few days. And so though it's mine, I'm going to keep my mouth shut and I'm not going to keep saying it. So consequences like that, when they are natural, a child who takes too long to get ready for bed. We have the privilege of having a bedtime story if we are in bed by a certain time. If you decide to take a long bath and you decide to take twice as long to put your clothes on, by the time you get to bed, we look at the clock and you have naturally lost the privilege of having your bedtime story. Do you want to have it tomorrow? Well, you better be faster tomorrow so that you don't have to miss your bedtime story. Not asking for something politely, we'll give them a verbal reminder, the verbal instruction and correction, but sometimes they need more than that. And so we have a rule at the home. If you're being reminded to ask for something politely, and the second time you ask for it and it's not polite, you're not going to be granted that, even if it's your physical need. I need water. Well, I am so sorry. In a few minutes, maybe you can try again. Try another time, but the way you're speaking, you're not going to get it. And so natural consequences, if I don't speak politely, I'm not going to be granted that. A child who is unwilling to help during chore time, this is our time to work. This is our time to play. If you take longer to work, you just ate your playtime. So today there's no playtime. It's a related natural consequence. Or if you are... Oh, I have a very good experience I can share. My older child plays the piano. So she has piano lessons every week, and we pay for her piano lessons, just like most parents, right? But there was a time that she was not willing to follow the directions that the teacher had left on her paper, her instructions on how she should practice each song. And basically, they were songs that had been repeated week after week. And because she was unwilling to correct the simple mistakes that the teacher had pointed out to her, she kept getting the same song. And so I said, it's time for me to step in. So I said, Lila, I'm going to sit next to you and I'm going to help you because I think you're having a hard time passing this lesson because of lack of paying attention. Oh, she didn't like that. And she was giving me the attitude that she did not want me sitting next to her, telling her what she needed to do. Because after all, I am not her piano teacher, which fine, I don't want to be, but I'm the one paying for it, And so I'm like sitting next to her, and I realized that after 20 minutes, we were beginning a war. It was like I was developing in her this spirit of, I don't want you to be here. I just have to put up with you being here. But I have this attitude, and my nerves were, flaring up. And I was like, you know what? It doesn't have to be this way. So I walked away. I went to my room and I said, Lord, please give me wisdom. I need to know what to do. My first idea was stop for today and wait for tomorrow. Maybe it's just a bad day. So the next day I tried the same thing. The same thing happened. And so I approached her and I said, I have some news to you. Mommy has gladly paid for your piano lessons all this time, more than a year. And I'm happy to pay for it. But I don't think it's fair for me to continually pay for your lessons when you give me the attitude that you're giving me because you believe you know better than me. And so Mommy is going to give you the freedom to choose how you want to practice. I am not saying anymore to you, you can practice the way you want. And I could almost see a smile coming up. And I said, but I want you to know you're paying for it. Oh, immediately there came the question, how much does it cost? And I said, it costs this certain amount and you will be paying for it. And she said, every week? And I said, well, we can start with 1 week and we can see if you have a different attitude next week. If you don't have a different attitude next week, I am glad to let you continue to pay for it. Oh, you better believe that this child has been transformed. And I have not seen that attitude anymore. It only took one lesson. She paid for that one lesson. She had her money. She had to give it up. She handed it to the teacher. Never again did I have the problem with the attitude. And I don't have to threaten her when I sit next to her and I keep telling her, you're forgetting your flats. Let's correct it. I don't have to tell her. And if you give me that attitude, you know who's paying for the lesson. She remembers. I don't have to say anything. And so when you give the child a consequence that's related to the issue and that it's like they can associate, if I do this, I'm naturally going to receive this. It's not worth it. So I'm just going to obey. Okay, a child should be so trained that a refusal would be received in the right spirit and accepted as final. So when these are enforced, you will come to the point where a child is almost understanding. I need this, I need this refusal. I need this correction right now. And this is it. Mom's word is law, and I'm just going to take it. Now, number 4. Number 4 is unrelated enforced consequences. Now, when do we use those? There are certain circumstances and situations that it's hard for you to find a natural related consequence. And I can give you an example would be when the mother calls and the child does not come. What do you do in that case? What would be something relatable that you can do? I couldn't figure it out. So there had to be another type of punishment that didn't necessarily was naturally connected to it. And this is the book that gave me the idea. It basically instructed to get a chair or any seat in your home where the child was having to sit there every time that they broke a rule or they disobeyed. Now, the seat was not to be presented to the child in a negative connotation, such as this is your punishment chair or this is your timeout chair, but this is your thinking chair. So anytime that mommy calls you and you don't come quickly, you have to sit on this chair and think, how can I do better next time? Now, this is a very simple punishment, right? It doesn't hurt. But if it's done 100% of the time, the child quickly creates the habit. I don't want to waste 5 minutes of my time sitting on this chair because I did not come when my mother called me. And so it's the repetition of that engraves in the child's mind. It's better to obey than to sit on the thinking chair. So we created this space right in our living room. It's not an isolation in the closet in the dark. No, it's right where the child can be, feel safe, but no entertainment, like no toys around. You just sit there and you just get bored. It's how to bring boredom to a child to the point where they are going to think, I'd rather obey than to sit here and be bored. And so we called it the thinking chair. And every time that I said something to her and she didn't obey quickly, all I would say, it's time to go think. I wouldn't say, again, I'm going to have to send you to the thinking chair because it's time to go think. And she would go and sit down. And I usually gave a minute per age. So if she was 3, she sat for 3 minutes. When she was 4, we could increase the time. And honestly, I haven't had to use it after 5 years old. They get to the point where they understand, I better not do this, right? But they sat there and they had to think. And every time I would come out and I would tell them, it's time for you to come out. Do you remember why you're sitting here? Yes, I'm sitting here because you called me and I did not come quickly. Okay, and what will you do next time? Next time you call, I'm going to come running. Okay, perfect. Case is settled. It's a very simple discipline that doesn't cause pain, but it will bring positive result. And the way it works for me, it's almost like a child that gets burned by touching something that's hot. This child does not need to have a 3rd-degree burn to know she should not touch that, because it's the surety that the consequence will come that keeps her away from the heat, not the intensity of the consequence, right? So it does not have to be painful. It doesn't have to be dramatic. It doesn't have to be traumatic to the child. They have to be sure that every time I make a mistake, I am going to have this consequence. And I can tell you that seat in the house was hot because they were in and out of it a lot. There was one day I remember I had a friend at the house, and my girl and her girl were playing, and they would run in the hallway and scream. And I had my younger sleeping, and I told my child, please do not scream when you walk past her bedroom door because she's going to wake up. She had to come to the thinking chair 15 times at least while my friend was there. And the friend just couldn't believe. She's like, but I said, I've started her on this. If because my friend is here today, I cut her slack on it, tomorrow it's going to be a lost case scenario. So we are going to continue. And she kept coming. And there was one time, which is very interesting, she went running in the hallway and screamed. And before I had a chance to call her to come to the thinking chair, I looked over and she was sitting right there. She knew I gotta go sit, so she quickly came back running and sat on the thinking chair. And I gave her the look, it's time for you to move on. And she left until many of the issues were solved. So being loud, interrupting others when others are speaking, that was one thing that we used when my husband and I were talking, and they would come, I'm like, can you please go to the thinking chair? I'll be there. Do you know why you're here? Yes, because I did not say excuse me and I interrupted. What can you do next time? Well, next time I will wait for a break and I'll say excuse me. Good, you're good to go. And it was the repetition of this. Put them back on the thinking chair, put them back on the thinking chair. And it worked. In the book, it said, for another child, it was as simple as flipping the hat backwards. Every time they disobeyed or they broke a rule, flip your hat backwards. And that alone was what brought the child back to the remembrance. It's better to obey than to just have the hat backwards every time I say something. So it's not the severity of the punishment, but it's how often it is inflicted. And there's a quote here that talks about it. Child Guidance 36, ask the gardener by what process he makes every branch and leaf to flourish so beautifully and to develop in symmetry and loveliness. He will tell you that it was by no rude touch, no violent effort, for this would only break the delicate stems. It was by little attentions, often repeated. And so the thinking seat helped us very much whenever she would touch things that she was not allowed to, go touch the heaters, turn on heaters, turn off heaters. Or when they would grab mommy's phone without permission, you go back to the thinking seat, and never with a negative effect on your voice. And for some reason, when we started to implement the thinking seat, it was almost like my patience level increased drastically, because before I would only punish her when I would reach my limit, right? When it's built up, all these failures throughout the day, all these mistakes. And by the time I got to my limit when I would punish, there ain't no loving words coming out of you, right? You are ready to let them have it. But when they are constantly going back to the chair, every time they make a mistake, it's almost like it's in installments, and your anger never builds up because it's always paid for it, right? It's already being paid for it. Next time you go back to it, it's paid for. And so it helped me to maintain my mental sanity by doing that as well. But it taught her the lesson that anytime I make this mistake, I have a consequence. I'm not having a harsh consequence, but it's a consequence that I don't want to have. And it's sure to come. Verbal correction, natural consequences, enforced consequences related to the problem. Then you have your thinking chair, which is unrelated, but it works like a charm. And number 4, it is incentives, right? Ellen White was often having children stay at her house, and she had a lot of experience raising children aside from her own. And she does say, instead of punishing them when they did wrong, I would hold out inducements to them to do right. One was in the habit of throwing herself on the floor if she could not have her own way. I said to her, if you will not lose your temper once today, your Uncle White and I will take you into the carriage, and we will have a happy day in the country. But if you throw yourself on the floor once, you will forfeit your right to the pleasure. She wasn't threatening. She was just giving an opportunity. And I like inducements because it's almost like you put your child on the driver's seat. You give them the opportunity to lead. Do I really want to disobey and lose the privilege, or do I want to obey and be granted a special privilege? And I often believe inducements are more effective than punishment. In many ways, an inducement is more effective than punishment. It's not like you're trying to buy your child, but you are giving them the opportunity to choose. When I obey, I have happy results. When I disobey, I have unhappy results. What's better in life? Let's taste it for ourselves, right? And we used inducements with our oldest child. She had a hard time staying in bed. She would go to bed and sleep. 2 hours later, she was there waking us up. And she was no longer a baby. She was like 4 years old. And it was getting to us because our 2-year-old was not doing that. And the 4-year-old is every 2 hours in our room. We tried everything. I mean everything. We tried spanking. She got spanked. We tried threatening. We tried everything, to the point where we were on our knees at 4:00 in the morning praying. Every time she came, we would just kneel down and pray, Lord, give us wisdom. We don't know what else to do. I can't chain her to the foot of the bed. She's no longer in a crib. How do you keep a 4-year-old in her bed? And she had no nightmares. She just came because she didn't want to be alone, and her sister sleeping right next to her. How do you solve this? I don't want you in my bed. You have your room. You have your sister. Go to sleep. She would go. 2 hours later, she was back, until we decided inducements. Did I want to give her inducements? No. I wanted to punish her. That was my natural desire. This child needs punishment. She's being disrespectful. But okay, let's try inducements. That will be our last resort. So we created a bean bank. So we gave her 5 garbanzo beans to start with. And we told her, for every night that you don't come into our room, you're going to get 3 beans. 3 beans are added into your bean bank. You're starting out with 5, so you got a great start. Every time you come into our room, you lose a bean. So if you come to our room once, you're going to lose a bean. If you come twice, you're going to lose 2. If you come 3 times, you're losing 3. And you're going to start losing your beans. And sometimes she would come 6 or 7 times. This is how terrible it was. First night, didn't work at all. There was no encouragement. Now, what would she do with those beans? Forgot to tell you. So we created her a list of her favorite things she liked to do. Go on a picnic, and we put the price, 7 beans. Go on a bike ride, 8 beans. Go to the aquarium, that's expensive, 15 beans. And we had this on her list, and we told her, you got your opportunity. You are in charge of your bean bank right now. And every night you have a chance of earning or losing. She finally understood. And when she realized, if I just sleep, I can make money while I sleep, If I can just stay in my bed, I can have privileges the next day. That was the light switch in her, and she started to stay in the bed. And her sister, of course, I had to do the bean bank for her sister. Her sister would have like 30 beans, and older one was like struggling to get to 15 to go to the aquarium. But it worked, and the inducements did the trick until she finally realized it's better to sleep than to lose opportunities and privileges. And I would tell her, I said, look at me the next morning. I look like a zombie. I have no way of getting in the car and driving anywhere. So the nights that you keep me up all night, we just got to stay home. And we could be doing so many fun things, but I'm not even safe to be on the road. Is it better to wake me up, or is it better to just stay in your room? And until she finally was like, all right, I'll just stay in my room. And it worked for her. So the last, and I will say in this case, last and least of the modes of discipline is physical punishment. And I know that there are verses in the Bible, such as Proverbs 22:15, that says, foolishness is bound in the heart of a child, but the rod of correction shall drive it far from him. And Proverbs 13:24 says, whoever spares the rod hates his son, but he who loves him is diligent to discipline him. I was spanked as a child more than once, many times. And I do remember even times that it was not done the right way, if there's a way of saying that. I'm not traumatized. I have a good relationship with my parents. We have respect for one another. But I also see that spanking should be your last resort, and if needed at all, right? The rod of discipline is not just a spanking stick. When we think of the shepherd's rod, what was the purpose of the rod? To guide. What else? To protect. That's how he counted, to make sure they were all there. It was not just for spanking, right? I do know that there is a place for spanking and there's a time for spanking, but the rod of discipline is much more than just the hitting rod. When your child makes a mistake, it's not like a way of giving them back at the same measure for what the sin that they have committed. And the experience we've had with our kids is that if we are consistent, which I mean bringing a consequence, no matter how gentle and tender it is, 100% of the time, and are earnestly praying for them and studying what works for each child individually, and we are willing to experience and experiment with new ideas, we have had to use very little or no spanking. My oldest child has been spanked, as I've mentioned, even with the sleeping situation. And I regret that, because do you know what happened? She was spanked that one night, and my husband told her, if you come to the room one more time, I will have to do it again. And I remember it was like 3:00 in the morning. She had come like 5 times. And he said, if you come one more time, I'm going to have to do it again. She cried bitterly. 10 minutes later, she was there. I couldn't believe it. I said, Lord, have mercy. And I was quiet. I'm like, is he really going to spank her? 10 minutes later. And he looked at her and he said, Lila, I can't believe it. I just told you that if you came one more time, you were going to be spanked. And do you know what she said? After you spank me, will you sit next to me in my bed for 5 minutes? It was almost like it's worth getting the spanking because we can spend some extra time together. And I'm like, okay, this is sick. This is just not this. So it was clearly not the right type of discipline, right? And I do regret it. The few times that we have done, I can see that it was not effective in that circumstance. And so there is a time for it, and I understand that there are circumstances when it has to be used, but it takes so much wisdom to know when to use physical and corporal punishment as a consequence, that it's almost safe to try everything else twice before you resort to that. And unfortunately, a lot of families, they will try that first because it's the most painful, right? Physically, it is the most painful, but it's not always the most effective. Now, some children are so vicious in their tempers that the infliction of pain is necessary, but very many cases are made much worse by this manner of discipline. Never raise your hand to give them a blow unless you can, with a clear conscience, bow before God and ask Him blessing upon the correction you are about to give. So, if your heart is not in tune with God's, you have no right to raise your hand to spank a child, because your spirit has to be so submissive to the Lord to know that this is really the punishment that God wants you to inflict right there and right then. So how should it be done? Before you cause your child physical pain, you will, if you are a Christian father or mother, reveal the love you have for your erring one. As you bow before God with your child, you will present before the sympathizing Redeemer His own words, "Suffer the little children to come unto me, and forbid them not, for of such is the kingdom of God." That prayer will bring angels by your side, to your side. Your child will not forget these experiences. And the blessing of God will rest upon such instruction, leading him to Christ. When children realize that their parents are trying to help them, they will bend their energies in the right direction. Now, how often should it be performed? If I have a disobedient child, how often should her get spanked? That's a question that a lot of parents will ask. Whipping may be necessary when other resorts fail. So we should try everything else first, right? Yet, she should not use the rod if it's possible to avoid doing so. But if milder measures prove insufficient, punishment that will bring the child to its senses should, in love, be administered. Frequently, one such correction will be enough for a lifetime. A child that's constantly spanked, is that effective? No, because she didn't understand from the first time, probably, that the mother was authority, and the mother is trying to show her that she's authority with the spanking, and it's not really working. You know, spanking does not work if it's oftenly repeated. To show the child that he does not hold the lines of control. Okay, so frequently one such correction will be enough for a lifetime to show the child that he does not hold the lines of control. And when this step becomes necessary, the child should be seriously impressed with the thought that this is not done for the gratification of the parent or to indulge arbitrary authority, but for the child's own good. Now, I do have to say, we found something that works, that's a step down from spanking and a step up from comfortable, comfortable consequence. And we have used in our home many times with both girls, and it works. And it's cold showers. You know, my husband is really into this cold water baths, and he loves ice water. He will purposely wait for the water to have ice on it, to go in it. And he's seeing the benefits of it in his own health, in his own life. And one day he said, you know what? I think a cold shower would really fix some of the behavior that we're seeing here that are not working with some of the milder measures. And it is a sort of physical punishment, but it's good for you. It's hydrotherapy. Hydrotherapy works wonders. And there are times when we have reached the point of having the child not submit to your authority, where you see it's clear rebellion, and we have said, we will take you to the shower to calm you down. And that shower will do it. Now, if you live at the children's home, that may not work because you get it every day. But at our house, it ain't like that. And the shower really works. And they come out of it washed in the blood. It was a different child. And we have to use that. And we've recommended it to others have used, have that will develop while they're getting spanked by their parents, but it almost like soothes their nerves with that cold water hitting your body. That will do it for you. Okay. So I want to read you a quote from a book from Gentle Measures, and it really touched my heart. And it says, there is one consideration which, if properly appreciated, would have an overpowering influence on the mind of every mother in inducing her to establish and maintain a firm authority over her child during the early years of his life. And that is the possibility that this child may not live to reach maturity. That's in the case this child may die. Should the terrible calamity befall her of being compelled to follow her boy, yet young, to his grave, the character of her grief and the degree of distress and anguish which it will occasion her will depend very much upon the memories which his life and his relations to her have left in her soul. When she returns to her home, bowed down by the terrible burden of her bereavement, and wanders over the now desolated rooms which were the scenes of his infantile occupations and joys, and sees the now useless playthings and books and the various objects of curiosity and interest with which he was so often and so busily engaged, there can, of course, be nothing which can really assuage her overwhelming grief. But it will make a vital difference in the character of this grief, whether the image of her boy, as it takes its fixed and final position in her memory and in her heart, is associated with recollections of docility, respectful regard for his mother's wishes, and of ready and unquestioning submission to her authority and obedience to her commands, or whether, on the other hand, the picture of his past life, which is to remain forever in her heart, is to be distorted and marred by memories of outbreaks, acts of ungovernable impulse and insubordination, habitual disregard of all authority, and disrespectful, if not contemptuous, treatment of his mother. There is a sweetness as well as a bitterness of grief. And something like a feeling of joy and gladness will spring up in that mother's heart and mingle with and soothe her sorrow if she can think of her boy when he is gone as always docile, tractable, submissive to her authority, and obedient to her commands. Such recollections, it is true, cannot avail to remove her grief, perhaps not even to diminish its intensity, but they will greatly assuage the bitterness of it and wholly take away its sting. There's nothing worse than losing a child. But when you lose your child and the recollections you have of your interaction with the child is negative, I believe there is a special bitterness over that grief. But if that mother that lost a child knows she had that child into submission, and that child was respectful to her authority, and she has peace over the way that she brought up that child, that grief will definitely lose its sting. So what kind of experience are we looking to have with our children? Are we looking to look back when they leave home and say, oh, I wish I could have done this all over again? Or can we look back and we can be thankful for the experiences we've had of growing opportunities, and we can confidently say to the Lord, here am I, and here are the children that you have given to me when that great day comes. Is it going to be easy? It is not going to be easy. But God says When we pray, as we bow before God with our children and present before the sympathizing Redeemer his own words, suffer the little children to come to me, that prayer will bring angels to your side. Your child will never forget these experiences, and the blessing of God will rest upon the instruction leading him to Christ. So James 1:5 says, if any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God that giveth to all men liberally and upbraideth not, and it shall be given to him. I feel that more than the knowledge of all these books and even the inspired books is the experience that we have in prayer with God. Because when you don't think of anything else that could possibly work for that child, God always has something that will work. And he's willing to give it to us if we humbly ask him for wisdom. And to finalize, to bring this to a closure, I want to end with a quote from the last chapter of Child Guidance that says, when the judgment shall sit and the books shall be opened, when the well done of the great judge is pronounced and the crown of immortal glory is placed upon the brow of the victor, many will rise their crowns in sight of the assembled universe, and pointing to their mother, they will say, she made me all I am through the grace of God. Her instruction, her prayers have been blessed to my eternal salvation. How many of you want to have that experience with your child? Me too. And we can be sure that if we surrender it to the Lord and we are willing to heed to the instructions of the Holy Spirit, and if we're willing to treat our children as we would like to be treated, we will have them on that day. And even for children who have wandered away, the Lord has a special way of bringing them back. And the Holy Spirit never ceases to work. Even when we don't think he is working, he is. My brother left the church for a while. And honestly, I didn't know if he would ever come back, because the world out there was a lot more intriguing to him than the church itself. And he did come back, and he did tell us, he said, there was not one day that I didn't felt bothered by the Holy Spirit while I was away from church. So there was not one day I didn't heed to the call, but I was bothered every single day. And I know this was the prayers of my parents, and the power of our prayers over our children is unmeasurable. And we can be sure that the Lord is ready to give us the strength that we need to be able to raise them for him. So let's, I guess, bring the Q&A. Is James out there? Do you know?
Or are they going to be taking questions from out there?
I don't know.
Are you just going to read them, or are we going to take them from out there? Are we going to take them from out there?
If you want to pass your questions
Just in case.
to the aisle, just for, I mean, there may be questions that are very suitable to ask in public, that's fine. But just for your sake and for the sake of your children, if you have something that you would like to ask of a personal nature, just ask me or have one question here. And questions. Any questions, anyone?
What's in opportunity?
Okay, if you have more questions, if you think of right now, raise your hand. Yeah.
I don't want Lila in here.
Give me a light, you to think of more.
Well, I'll start by answering this first one. What type of discipline can a parent use given the Bible says, spare the rod, spoil the child? I think this has been answered, right? When we analyze what the rod is used for, I believe the spanking is the last one on the list, but it's there. But the rod that I believe it means here is the rod of instruction, the rod of correction, and there are many other ways that you can use before you get to the point of spanking. So do not spare the rod, but it's not necessarily your hitting rod, but it's the rod of direction and correction and instruction. Okay, next one. Go ahead, honey.
Yeah, we don't have teenagers, so there's a couple questions on discipline for teenagers. We have had some teenagers living in our homes and have a lot of friends with teenagers. Yeah, it seems like there still needs to be accountability, obviously, and there's still rules in a household, and sometimes loss of privileges, is probably a good way to go about it. I don't know about, just talked about the hydrotherapy. Yeah, I don't know if that's going to work for a teenager.
Yeah.
All right, go take a cold shower. Probably loss of privileges, I would think, would probably be, and more reasoning. So.
I guess I remember being a teenager, and a lot of times we would beg my mom to spank us rather than take away privileges.
Sure.
And of course, it's a lot for a teenager getting spanked. It's no longer the thing. And I don't think that the cold shower is going to work for a teenager either. But losing certain privileges that can be naturally related to that is a good idea. I know one mother that she has a curfew for her child, and if the child is not home by that moment of curfew, she starts to lose time into the following week. So if her curfew was 9:00 and she arrived at 9:10, next week her curfew is at 8:50. And so correcting with natural related consequences like that, and reasoning with the child and the teenager, I guess, and trying to understand what is the bottom line of the disobedience. And I feel that more than younger kids, they can express a lot more why. What's boiling in your heart that's making you willingly disobey me? Like, I want, as a parent, to understand, and I want to see if there's anything that I'm doing that's triggering that. And so I would say loss of privileges would be the right thing, but I believe that when you get to the teenage years, the issues you're dealing with can be more of issues of the heart rather than the little kids' disobedience. So it's connecting is of higher importance than the discipline. A lot of times, teenagers are needing attention too. And so a child that's not connected with, a child that doesn't have parents who listen, doesn't have parents who believe in him or to encourage him in the right direction, doesn't spend time with this child, this teenager, you're going to see a lot more problems than one that feels that the parent is also a close friend that they can connect with. And so focus on connecting and connect, instruct, and you might see some of the problems fall into place on its own, right?
Yeah, and this one was a little more specific on that than with teenagers their issue is that they're hanging out with friends they shouldn't be. So there's a social need there, But so maybe it's like loss of privileges and whatever, going out with friends, but then discussing and advising, how to fill that social need and in ways that would be beneficial to others if they're not of the same faith, which I think this question is more regarding. So you have to kind of fill a void. You can't just take away. You have to kind of, the principle of true education is something better. So, just take away all the time, then a teenager could get frustrated, I could see, and then get kind of rebellious, like, my parents don't understand, and then they're just start pulling away, which is kind of a dangerous road. So trying to make those social engagements positive, go camping together, do things so they are getting that outlet, social outlet, but in a better way. So you're filling voids or replacing things with something better. What are your thoughts on children being present to all their feelings? Should boys be allowed to cry? Or is it good advice to tell boys that crying is for girls? Yeah, I don't know about that. Yeah. Well, yeah, go ahead.
I think there's a time for weeping.
Yeah.
And there's a time for rejoicing. There's a time for everything. Boys do cry. Girls do cry. And it's all right to cry.
Yeah. Men cry.
Men cry.
Yeah, that's right.
James cries very sometimes, but he does cry. Jesus cried. But there is a time to stop. And I think this is relevant to the question here. A whining and a crying child shouldn't get her way. And a child that learns that crying is not going to get my way, give me my way, he's not going to be crying for no reason there. He's soon going to learn. It's time to stop. And the mother must say, I understand you're upset, you're sad, I'm sorry this happened. Come give me a hug. Everything is going to get better. Divert the mind and focus on something better. But boys should be allowed to cry just as much as girls. There's no gender restriction for crying. While being firm in your yes or no, how do we show our children to be persistent and inopportune in their prayers to God?
Is that question more in relation to prayer? Like, if we're teaching our children to learn how to take a yes or no, then why do we pray persistently for matters? Is that kind of the question there?
Yeah, it's kind of unclear.
Yeah, that's pretty deep.
Huh?
So, we should be persistent in our prayers, right? We're taught to be persistent in our prayers.
One thing that has really helped us is to identify the weaknesses of our children with them. And once you see a persistent behavior, so usually what I do is to say, we are seeing this behavior happening often. Can you name me what this is called? And they are very intelligent. They will name selfishness, unwillingness to obey, and this and that. And I will ask them, do you believe you can overcome this? Yes. How do you think you're able to overcome that? Jesus can help me overcome. Have you been asking Jesus to help you overcome that? And oftentimes the answer is no. They don't think to ask God to help them overcome that. And so we will go together and we will make a list of things that she can pray for. And with that list, when she has her morning or her evening prayers, she has a guideline of things that she could open up her heart to Jesus that are directed to her weaknesses, and God is there to help her. And I've seen great improvement knowing that they are praying for their weaknesses on their alone prayer time with Jesus. Because the mother can pray for the child, but if the child doesn't recognize her need for that transformation, it's a lot harder, right? And so I believe that helping the child come to the point of conviction that she needs help with that, and help her write down her needs and encourage her to pray for that. And what I will usually do, if I have a list that's new that week, we created a new list. For the first few days, I will have her morning prayer with her, and I will pray for those things and teach her how to pray, right? Our prayers, teach me how to pray, Father. And so this is the job of the mother, teach the child how to pray for her needs. And later on, when I feel she's got a grip of this, she knows how to ask Jesus to help her be unselfish, to help her listen to first command, to better manage her time, then she can continue on her own. So recognizing the need and teaching them how to go to God for help. Is that it?
Yeah, and maybe if this question is also asking if we're teaching our children to accept a yes or no from us, how do they understand that we should be persistent in repeating prayers to God for things, which of course prayer is communication with God to help us understand His will, and sometimes we don't understand it. So I guess that's a lesson of trying to help teach our children the importance of prayer, the purpose in prayer, not to that we pray repeatedly, not to convince God to change His mind, but as a process of helping us understand His will. So it's a little bit different. And yeah, I could see that maybe kids also might not understand some of our decisions, so it might take time to go over that again. Yeah, deep question.
Does anybody else have a question they would want to ask?
I don't know what the intent of the question was, but I just.
Mike, sorry.
It's right
Oh,
there.
it's right there.
I don't know what the intent of the question was, but what I wondered if the question is how do you differentiate between persisting in asking God and persisting in asking your parents when they have said no?
Right.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Well,
In prayer, we're seeking to understand and know God's will, right? And sometimes God doesn't flash a green light or a red light, so we may not even understand clearly. But with the parent, sometimes the answer is quite clear. So, this is a clear answer. If you keep asking, it's not going to change. I've had our children maybe repeatedly ask the same thing. Sometimes we just have to remind them, I know you've asked a lot on this. I understand your desires. This is the answer. It's not going to change. So I don't, at some point I have to finally say, I don't want you to ask anymore. And that would be just like God telling that to Moses. Eventually He just said, Moses, you will not be entering into the promised land.
yeah.
Do not talk to me anymore on this matter. Yeah.
We do have a saying at our house that persistency is disobedience. So when the mother has already said no, and you continue to insist and insist and insist, this is one way of being disobedient. So sometimes the second or the third time, all I have to say is, remember, persistence is, and they go, disobedience. And they just surrender, because this is not, you're not going to get it. You're ready to disobey by trying for the third time, So I guess.
Because the decision's already been clear.
Yes. Yeah.
Asked God, and God said no,
Mm-hmm.
and he kept asking.
Yeah, Balaam was pushing his will.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we need to try to train our children not to push their will. That's right.
Yes. That kind of reminds me a point that I wanted to have made and I forgot. A lot of times when we tell a child, you give them a command, can you please come and sit on the first pew? And the child's first response is, why? I don't know, but the more I studied into perfect obedience or complete submission. I was disturbed by that response. But at the same time, I'm not trying to raise robots that when I speak, they just, it's like Mama speaks and I just follow. I want them to understand a lot of the things, but I didn't know how to come about and just tell them asking why is disobedience. You don't ask, you just do it. And the Lord gave me wisdom through an experienced mother. And she said, when you give a child a command, the first response always has to be, yes, Mom. Whether the child understood or the child did not understand, and whether the child liked it or did not like it, the answer has to be, yes, Mom. After she says, yes, Mom, she has the right to ask, but why do I need to sit in the front seat? But it's after she said yes and after she obeyed. So when we are training our children to obey us, we have to get to the point where they will take the command and they will follow it, even if they don't understand why, simply because mother has said so. And you don't have to always understand why. I may not give you the answer, but you do have the right to ask only after you have obeyed. And it's really being, it helped me a lot in parenting because it gave me this balance of giving the child the ability and the freedom to know certain things they ought to know, they can know, and showing them that my word is authority and you have to obey even if you don't understand. And sometimes when we forget and we just ask why before we say yes, Mom, or before we obey, then the natural consequences, I would gladly let you know why, but you must first obey me before you ask why. So this time you just need to obey because I told you you have to. And so next time they don't want to be curious or left wondering why. They will remember to ask after they have obeyed. And the same comes from when you give them a command and they want to do something else. A lot of times when they were little, I would say, let's go to the shower. And the answer was, no, Mom, I'm putting a puzzle together. And I'm like, I'm not comfortable with that answer, but how do you just tell a child, I told you to go to the shower and you just get up and you go? That's not what I want either. And the same principle came, the first answer when Mom gives a command is, yes, Mom. But do we end there? No, you can continue and you say, I am almost done finishing a puzzle. May I please finish and go in 2 minutes? Yes, you may. It's a genuine request. But if the answer is, no, Mom, I'm putting a puzzle together, and you allow that to go without being corrected, you're teaching the child that your word is not law and that they can have their wishes over your commands. They are still going to get their way, right? Finishing the puzzle, but there is a right way of going. And so if they answer to me, no, Mom, by any chance, they've lost their chance of asking for whatever else they need. So I will always remind them. I said, well, next time when you answer correctly and you say, yes, Mom, or I'm coming, but may I please do this before, then you may or may not be granted your request. And a lot of times they are very reasonable requests. It's only going to delay the whole process by a minute or two. And I'm glad to grant that if the response is positive. So having a child understand your word is law does not mean you're raising robots. It means you're raising children who will respond to your authority with respectful answers, but they can also express their wishes and their questions to you. Anyway, this was part of the lecture and it got lost in thought somewhere.
Great. All right, so maybe we should
Pray.
Yeah. All right. Should we have everyone stand for prayer? Unless there's any. Okay, let's pray. Dear Father, thank you so much for the Sabbath we could spend together here at the Waynesboro Church. We just want to pray you bless this church, the families that are present here, and that you would give us wisdom, Lord, and that you would touch our hearts and give us a deep conversion, that we would learn to yield to you, our God. And we just pray you bless our children, help us to surround them with love and cheerfulness, and guide them in the right way. And we just pray that our families would be truly testimony of the power of Christ. And we just thank you now. We ask that you go with each one, give us traveling mercies. And we thank you so much, asking your blessing in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. And
Just a reminder, there'll be baskets at the back if you want to give a love offering on your way out. Was that what you're saying?
this has been online, right?